What keeps a marriage going when there's no love, trust, or basic respect? Some try to hold the family together for the kids, others fear public judgment and care about others' opinions, while some are stopped by religious beliefs or a mix of these factors. But sometimes, the desire to save a marriage at any cost can turn into a horrible tragedy. The story of Jacqueline and Paul Crymble isn't unique, but it drew widespread attention due to its cruelty, greed, and cynicism. The criminal was dubbed the Black Widow and put behind bars, but her daughter confessed in a candid interview that her mother continued to ruin lives even while in prison. The relationship of Jacqueline and Paul Crymble. Jacqueline, or just Jackie Mary Bennett, was born on December 18, 1974, in County Armagh, Northern Ireland, as the youngest of two children in an ordinary middle-class family. From childhood, she was erratic, spoiled, defiant, and sometimes even aggressive. In her teenage years, Jackie's behavior got worse, becoming completely unmanageable, but her family blamed it on adolescence, hoping she'd grow out of it. In high school, she met Paul Crymble, who was 3 years older and her complete opposite in every way. But as they say, opposites attract, and this principle seemed to work perfectly here. Paul was a modest and shy young man from a religious family, a good student, considered very talented and promising. Jacqueline's boldness, energy, and confidence attracted him. She was the first, and likely the only girl he had serious feelings for. Jackie's parents approved of her choice and welcomed Paul, believing he would make their daughter more calm, sensible, and reasonable. Sometimes it seemed like her family treated Paul better than Jackie herself, accepting him as a family member from the day they met. However, Paul's parents were cautious about his choice but didn't stop the young couple's relationship. School friends also noted that the couple seemed incompatible. Jackie often provoked conflicts, preferring to solve them with physical force, while Paul tried to resolve everything peacefully, avoiding violence, and was considered friendly, open, and very responsible. He always kept his word and was ready to help others at any moment, described as a kind, sensible, and mature young man beyond his years. At 17, Jacqueline got pregnant by her boyfriend and immediately told him. At that time, she was in her final school year, and 20-year-old Paul was already a college student. Upon learning this, Paul immediately declared his readiness to marry her and take full responsibility for her and the child. Jacqueline wasn't ready for family life or raising a child, but terminating the pregnancy was out of the question. Neither Paul nor his religious family would allow such a grave sin. So Paul bought a ring and officially proposed to Jackie, who accepted. The couple had a modest wedding in 1992, celebrating with their closest family and friends. Interestingly, a few days before the event, Paul confessed to his best friend that he and Jacqueline were too different in every way, doubted the sincerity of her feelings, and was even afraid of her due to her temper. The groom also doubted whether he truly loved her or just felt sympathy and a sense of duty. But since he never had relationships with other girls, he had nothing to compare. His friend listened attentively and tried to dissuade Paul from marrying, warning him that he might make the biggest mistake of his life and be unhappy forever. However, Paul was determined, saying he couldn't leave a girl expecting his child. Besides, he believed that motherhood would change Jacqueline's character for the better, making her softer and calmer. In general, Paul hoped for the best, but he had no idea how wrong he was. Family life without love. In early 1993, the young couple welcomed their first child, a daughter named Danielle. 6 years later, Jacqueline gave birth to their son, Adam. Paul was the sole provider for his family, ensuring they lacked nothing. After the birth of their second child, the Crymbles decided to find a more spacious home and purchased a cozy 3-bedroom townhouse in Armagh, moving in 2000. By then, Paul held a senior mechanical engineer position, earning a solid salary. His wife, however, did not trouble herself with work, claiming she preferred managing the household and raising the children. However, she was not particularly good at either. Jackie was selfish, lazy, quick-tempered, and often showed aggression even towards her children. When the children grew a bit older, Jacqueline tried to find a job, but her quarrelsome and confrontational nature meant she never stayed employed for long. Furthermore, she spent nearly every evening at bars, consuming alcoholic drinks while her husband remained home with their daughter and son. Even when sober, Mrs. Crymble was not the most pleasant person, and under the influence of alcohol, she turned into a real fury. She not only provoked conflicts but also engaged in fights, used foul language, and behaved inappropriately with various men. Any remarks or requests to behave more modestly were met with aggression, and no one could predict what she might do next. Neighbors and family friends were aware of what was happening and genuinely felt sorry for Paul and the children who suffered the most from Jacqueline's antics. Since the family lived in a small, quiet town, many people knew about the young woman's escapades and tried to avoid her. Her bad reputation affected her husband and children, who faced repercussions from peers at school. Jackie led a wild lifestyle without trying to hide it, frequently visiting entertainment venues. However, her presence there frightened not only other patrons but also the staff, who knew that her arrival inevitably meant a conflict or fight. Jacqueline kept her family in fear because she could lash out at them at any moment. Paul tried not to complain about the situation, but his friends, family, and colleagues noticed his discomfort around his wife, or even just mentioning her. He was often advised to leave this woman, but Paul feared losing the chance to see his children. In any argument, Jackie would immediately threaten to cut him off from their daughter and son. She also threatened to harm him by involving her acquaintances. These were men she regularly met at bars, who were ready to commit crimes for her sake. Paul usually yielded to his wife in such situations and kept silent. The mysterious attack. On Sunday morning, June 20th, 2004, a frightened woman called the emergency services, pleading for help. She claimed that 3 strangers attacked her and her husband in their home, beating them, tying them up, attempting to rob them, and then driving away with their car, taking her husband with them. The caller was Jacqueline Crymble, and police officers and medics immediately rushed to the address she provided. At the house, they found a woman with her hands tied behind her back with a plastic cable tie. However, her legs were not bound, leading the authorities to believe she had managed to partially free herself. Notably, the victim had no injuries or bruises on her body, even though she initially claimed that the attackers had beaten and tied them up. Fortunately, the couple's children were not at home, as they had been sent to spend the weekend with their paternal grandparents. According to Jacqueline, the previous evening on Saturday, she and her husband had gone to a bar to relax. They drank and returned home after midnight. However, as Paul was opening the front door, 3 figures suddenly jumped out of the darkness and pushed them inside the house. The intruders, brandishing a gun, tied up the couple, beat them, and demanded money and prohibited substances. Allegedly, Paul tried to reason with the criminals, begging them to release him and his wife and promising not to call the police, but this only angered them. They hit him several times and then began to strangle him with a plastic bag in front of the terrified Jacqueline. When it became clear that there was no cash or prohibited substances in the house, the intruders decided to at least steal the car, but for some reason took the owner with them, leaving the bound woman behind. After the criminals drove away with Paul, Jacqueline managed to reach the phone and call the police using her tongue. She was sure her husband might still be alive and begged the detectives to find and save him immediately. However, despite her distress, the woman appeared and acted suspiciously calm, though the authorities had no reason to distrust her at that moment. The mutilated body in the trunk. The couple's car was immediately reported missing throughout the county, and investigators began collecting evidence at the crime scene. They tried to gather any details about the attackers, but Jacqueline claimed that the criminals wore masks. She couldn't recall any distinguishing features like clothing details, speech defects, limping, or anything similar. All she could say was that there were 3 of them, and they were men. By Monday morning, less than a day after the search began, the Crymble family car was found abandoned just 3 miles from the house where the attack had taken place. It was parked in a deserted alley next to a long vacant house. Inside the trunk was the mutilated body of its owner, bearing clear signs of beating and torture. The 35-year-old man's hands were tied behind his back, his legs bound with a cable tie, and his face and body covered with numerous bruises. When Jackie was informed of the gruesome discovery, she reacted surprisingly calmly. It seemed the brutal deprivation of her husband, the father of her children, didn't bother her much. She tried to feign surprise and pain but couldn't muster a single tear and literally asked when she would get her car back within a minute. This all appeared very suspicious, prompting law enforcement to take a closer look at the young widow. The main suspect. Initially, Jacqueline's version was not questioned and was considered the only credible account. However, the strange behavior of the widowed mother of two led law enforcement to suspect she might be lying. Soon it was revealed that her marriage to Paul had been falling apart for a long time, and she was never a model wife and mother. Not only neighbors and acquaintances spoke poorly of her, but even her children and parents. It also came to light that Jackie had been seeing a man named Roger Ferguson for several months. He owned a farm in Armagh where he lived with his mother. She and Crymble were often seen together in various entertainment venues in town, drinking alcohol. Moreover, Roger visited the married woman at her home when her husband was at work and the children were at school and daycare. Just the day after the car with the disfigured body was found, Jacqueline went from victim to the main suspect, and Roger was considered a possible accomplice. The woman did not appear to be a grieving widow and was much more concerned about getting her car back. Furthermore, her account of an attack by a gang of armed addicts sounded implausible. Nothing like this had ever happened in the quiet town before, and where had they gone after abandoning the vehicle with a body in the trunk? Additionally, the mysterious criminals managed to leave no traces, which was also strange. There were no other witnesses who saw suspicious strangers in town. However, almost everyone who ever interacted with the victim spoke negatively about her. Moreover, it soon emerged that the deceased man had an insurance policy, and his wife could expect a large payout of £300,000 sterling in the event of his passing. Now, a real motive had appeared in this case, which could explain the crime. Investigation into the crime. Jacqueline claimed she managed to call for help by dialing on a button phone with her tongue. The device was taken for examination, and indeed, traces of her saliva were found on it. However, at the initial crime scene inspection, investigators noted the phone was on the coffee table face down. With her hands tied behind her back, there was no way she could have turned it over after the call or dialed for help if it was in that position from the start. The couple's home computer search history revealed strange queries. Someone had been looking for information on life insurance, payout amounts, and procedures in the event of the policyholders passing for months. When Jacqueline was directly asked about this, she said she knew nothing and suggested that perhaps Paul was interested in it. Roger Ferguson, who was considered a potential accomplice in the crime, had a rock-solid alibi. His mother claimed he spent the night at home because he wasn't feeling well, and around 1:30 in the morning, she was searching the home medicine cabinet for something to treat his stomach issues. Despite the elderly woman's convincing testimony, they didn't remove her son from the suspect list just yet. Police decided to track the suspect's locations on the night of the crime through their cell phone signals, discovering that Roger had not been home as his mother claimed. Instead, he was at the Crymbles' house, where he stayed for several hours. Additionally, he continued his relationship with the widowed woman, and they were seen together at a bar the day after Paul's funeral. Another curious detail was that Jacqueline and Roger visited a car dealership together, where they were looking at SUVs and inquiring about installment plans for such an expensive purchase. Roger's mother was even with them, which seemed even more suspicious. The police suspected that the lovers had already planned how they would spend the insurance payout after Paul's passing, and Roger's mother was likely aware. However, during interrogations, Jackie insisted she never cheated on her husband and certainly didn't wish him harm, but no one believed her anymore. Shortly before the tragedy, Jacqueline had started working as a caregiver in a nursing home, but lasted only a few weeks before being fired due to constant conflicts and lies. Nevertheless, she didn't tell her husband, continuing to pretend she was going to work or had night shifts while staying at Ferguson's house. The deception was accidentally revealed when Paul met one of his wife's former colleagues who told him everything. He tried to talk to his wife, but this only sparked another argument. She threatened to leave him for her lover, take the children, and forbid their biological father from approaching them. This was Paul's biggest fear, so he agreed to compromise and turned a blind eye to her infidelity. He could only confide in his closest friend, who later testified in court as a witness, recounting Paul's words. The development and execution of a devious plan. Roger wasn't particularly smart. He was strong but somewhat simple-minded and easily led. Jacqueline quickly managed to completely dominate him, manipulating her lover to do her bidding. He would readily get into a fight for her, which flattered her immensely. He was likely genuinely in love with her and believed everything she said. The woman complained to Ferguson about her husband, accusing him of being rude, cruel, and even physically abusive. Naturally, this was all lies, but with each complaint, the lover grew to despise Paul more, believing he was harming and oppressing Jacqueline and was the main obstacle to their happiness together. She implanted the idea in his mind that by eliminating her husband, all their problems would be solved, allowing them to be together while receiving a substantial sum of money for a comfortable life. About 2 weeks before the tragedy, Mrs. Crymble tried to find people willing to commit the crime for money, but after considering several options, she and Roger abandoned the idea. It seemed the lovers decided they could carry it out themselves without leaving evidence or witnesses, ensuring they kept the entire insurance payout. On Friday, June 18th, Jacqueline took the children to stay with their grandparents for the weekend. On Saturday, she suggested that her husband go out for drinks to relax and talk. Paul gladly accepted the offer, thinking it might help their relationship. He didn't realize it was an invitation to his demise. That night, people in the bar noticed Jackie trying hard to get her non-drinking husband intoxicated. She bought drinks and practically forced him to knock back one shot after another, then led her staggering husband out of the bar after midnight. They were caught on surveillance cameras, and that was the last time Paul was seen alive. This revealed a significant timing discrepancy. The bar was a 10-minute walk from the couple's home, and the attack occurred immediately upon their return, lasting no more than 15 minutes, according to Jacqueline. After that, her husband was supposedly kidnapped and driven away in their car, and she immediately called the police. However, about an hour and a half elapsed between the time they were captured on camera and the call to the police. Investigators believed this time was spent by the perpetrators covering their tracks and staging the scene of an attack by third parties. Moreover, Jacqueline apparently intentionally got her husband drunk so he couldn't resist. According to her, the criminals kicked Paul while he was down, then began to strangle him by placing a plastic bag over his head and securing it with tape. The nature of the injuries on the deceased's body confirmed her account, but the police were nearly certain by then that the assailants were she and her lover, Ferguson. Incontrovertible evidence. After a long and thorough examination of the crime scene, detectives found a partially erased footprint of a man's shoe, which had been obviously attempted to be cleaned, but poorly. The tread pattern matched Roger's shoes, but this evidence could be considered circumstantial. However, there were other, more substantial pieces of evidence against the criminal couple. In the kitchen trash, a cigarette butt with Roger's saliva was found, and on the cable tie that bound Jacqueline's hands was a partial fingerprint of his. Moreover, on the ties binding the deceased's hands and feet, Ferguson's fingerprints were present, and on the bag used to suffocate the victim, sweat and oil traces of both lovers were found. The investigation also uncovered another participant in this brutal crime, a minor acquaintance of Roger named Colin Robinson. Roger called him on the night of the attack, asking for a favor to help with something unspecified. The teenager drove his car, left it at the end of the street at Roger's request, and walked to the house to avoid attracting attention. When Colin realized what was happening, he wanted to run, but Roger intimidated him and by threatening with a knife, forced him to help move the body to the car and load it into the trunk. Afterward, They drove the car to a deserted place and abandoned it. Initially, the frightened young man denied his involvement in the crime, but he broke down during the second interrogation and began to confess. Trial and sentence. The investigation lasted several months. During this time, they gathered undeniable evidence, interviewed all witnesses, and obtained a confession from the third participant in the crime. However, the trial of the criminals only began in the spring of 2007, almost 3 years after Paul Crymble's deprivation of life. On May 7, 2007, Jacqueline and Roger were found guilty of a premeditated crime with the intent to obtain insurance money. The widow was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while her lover and accomplice received 18 years. The young accomplice, Colin Robinson, was sentenced to 3 years for assisting the criminals and attempting to cover up the truth. Roger's elderly mother also couldn't escape responsibility for perjury and providing a false alibi for her son. However, considering the woman's advanced age and her serious health problems, she was given only a year of probation. Revenge on her own children. Even in prison, Jacqueline continued to ruin her family's lives. She was angry that no one supported her in court, and that everyone who knew her personally was relieved when she went behind bars. Even her own mother said that people like Jackie should be isolated from society forever, so that they can't harm anyone. Interestingly, a few days after the funeral, Jacqueline burned all of her late husband's belongings and photos, so nothing in the house reminded her of him. Danielle somehow managed to save a couple of photos with her father. She kept them in her bedside table, and her mother simply didn't know about them. The insurance payout of £300,000, for which Paul was assassinated, went to his children. Danielle and Adam lost both parents overnight, but their troubles didn't end there. Their mother was adamantly against either her parents or the murdered husband's parents raising the children. She did everything to deprive them of guardianship rights, so the children ended up in foster care despite having living grandparents. At the time of the tragedy, Danielle was only 11, and her brother Adam was barely 5. Jacqueline managed to retain her parental rights and attempted to manipulate her children from prison. Specifically, she wanted them to publicly declare her innocence, using various pressure tactics. For example, she promised to sign permission for their school trips if they visited her in prison, but she deceived them. During the visit, she demanded they testify in her favor and refused to sign the document. As a result, the brother and sister were the only ones who couldn't go on weekend excursions with their class. Now Danielle is 31, living in Basingstoke, working in a daycare, and dating a man named Simon Bryce, who is an engineer. Her brother, now 25, has a good education and moved to London. Jacqueline is set to be released next year, and her adult children are seriously worried that their mother will continue to do everything possible to poison their lives. Today we are going to visit India. India is the only country in the world where cultural and religious traditions have not been interrupted since ancient times, which is probably why it attracts tourists from all over the planet. But in our story, we will look at India like a coin that has a different image on each side. On April 20th, 2018, at dawn, 2 young men went fishing down the river toward a mangrove forest. They took a long boat ride downstream until they reached a remote and quiet place. One of them jumped into the water to tie up the boat, but his attention was distracted by a pungent, acrid odor that was very close by. They went ashore and followed the odor. Curiosity led them to a horrifying find. There was something that looked like a human body hanging on a tree branch, and a skull lying nearby. The guys abandoned the boat and rushed to the nearest village to report the terrible find. A team of investigators, forensic experts, and police officers urgently arrived on the spot. The experts confirmed that the suspended body was indeed human. It was obvious that it had been hanging for a long time and had already begun to decompose. The flesh on the arms and legs had torn off. The skull was found nearby. Next to the body were packs of cigarettes, packaged drinking water, and a lighter, which probably belonged to the victim. An investigation was conducted at the scene the same morning. The evidence found was seized, and the remains were sent for examination. The modest remnants of clothing that could be identified on the victim were identified. Liga Scroman, a 33-year-old hiker, was the victim of an accident. But who is Liga Scroman, and what happened to her on the riverbank? Liga Scroman was born in Latvia in 1986. She grew up in a large and friendly family, had an older brother and a younger sister. The sisters were very friendly, and from childhood shared all joys and hardships with each other. Growing up, Liga moved to Ireland, but always maintained close relations with her family. It was in Ireland that she met Andrew Jordan. It was not love at first sight, as the modest Liga had difficulty in communicating with new people. But after 5 years, Liga and Andrew turned into a married couple who made great plans for the future. And despite the fact that Liga worked in a hotel and led a modest lifestyle, she dreamed of opening her own center of yogic retreats in Portugal. Andrew supported his beloved's idea, and together they saved money for 4 years to fulfill their dream. But fate had other plans. In early 2018, Liga was experiencing the effects of an aggravated skin disease that was causing physical and mental discomfort. To help her sister overcome this ailment and restore her emotional state, her sister Ilse invited Liga on a trip. So in February 2018, Liga and Ilse traveled to Trivandrum, the capital of Kerala, so that Liga could receive Ayurvedic treatment for depression. Kovalam is the premier Ayurvedic resort of Kerala in India. Kovalam, which means grove of coconut palms in Hindi, is a small village offering everything you need for a comfortable and complete rest and treatment. Ayurveda is the oldest system of medical knowledge, which originated more than 5,000 years ago. Ayurveda is based on the universal laws of nature, on the unity of all things in this world. Ayurvedic programs help a person to restore balance and harmony in the body. Panchakarma is the best Ayurvedic program for modern man in Kerala. Panchakarma helps to reboot the body effectively. Most of those who have undergone the Panchakarma course in Kerala repeat it annually, and it is not without reason, as regular Panchakarma not only allows us to get rid of extra pounds, but also adds a couple of decades of healthy life. Since 1985, Ayurveda has been recognized by the World Health Organization as the most effective system of alternative medicine in the world. Let us emphasize that all the promised benefits of Ayurveda are only an alternative, not a panacea for healthy longevity. The 33-year-old Liga and her sister came to Kerala in search of spiritual enlightenment, hoping to be cured of depression in one of the Ayurveda centers. Their treatment tour was scheduled for 6 weeks and included yoga classes, meditation, therapeutic herbal drinks, and nutritional and massage recommendations. The sisters were treated together at an Ayurvedic clinic at Kovalam in Kerala and have already completed their course. On the morning of March 14th, Liga refused to go to yoga class with her sister, explaining that she had a headache. When Ilse returned to her room, Liga was not there. With the help of the hotel staff, Ilse was able to find out that her sister left the hotel around 11:30 a.m. wearing leggings and a yoga t-shirt, hired an auto rickshaw, and went to Kovalam Beach for a walk. The beaches around Kovalam are popular destinations for both domestic and international travelers. The sandy beaches of Kovalam are always crowded. However, Liga could not be found there. Ilse wandered the beach until late at night showing her sister's picture, but never heard the long-awaited response that someone had seen her. This was actually strange, as Liga was a tall white girl who definitely stood out, and if she was actually on the beach, someone should have seen her. After searching unsuccessfully, Ilse went to the police station to report her sister missing. However, the Indian police officers did not show any sympathy for the missing foreign tourist, but on the contrary, complacently asserted that they would surely find the girl who had strayed, or she would surely return the next day. They were not even deterred by the fact that Liga, according to her sister, had psychological problems and could be an easy target for criminals. The Potencod police registered a case, but the investigation started coldly, or rather it is more correct to say did not start at all. Ilse Scromani had traveled extensively in Kerala. She had been to Kollam, Varkala, and finally came to Kovalam. She considered herself a very experienced traveler in India, and this time she took her sister with her to show her the India she loved so much. But the trip turned tragic. After a few days of inaction by the Indian police, Ilza started searching on her own. She enlisted the help of friends and also reported Liga missing to her husband. Andrew flew urgently to India. The police investigation intensified after the missing person's husband. Andrew, Jordan, and Ilza contacted the local press and started an online campaign to find her. Ilza also reached out via Twitter to India's Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj. "Please help! My sister, a Latvian citizen, has been missing for 8 days. We are very worried," she wrote. The desperate sister announced a reward of 100,000 rupees to anyone who could help find Liga or provide any information about her movements that day. Ilza and her friend Alexa, who had also traveled to India after hearing about Liga's disappearance, put up posters in the Kovalam beach area where Liga was last seen. Together, they put up flyers and distributed them to people. Numerous locals took an active part in the search for the missing tourist. The important fact remained that Liga suffered from depression and had a hard time interacting with strangers. On the day of her disappearance, she hired an auto rickshaw to reach the beach and was never seen again. She had about 1,000 rupees with her but no passport, so she could not leave the country. Ashok Kumar, head of the local police station, said that the police had no leads in the case. The police kept saying that the tourist had gone on a bender or eloped and would soon return on her own. However, regular, persistent requests for help from Ilza and Andrew forced the police to search for Liga. The search operation was conducted in the Kovalam beach area where Liga Skramani was last seen. Police assumed that she had drowned, just as the unidentified body of a woman was found washed ashore at Kula Chal in Kanyakumari district. Investigators examined the body along with the missing woman's sister, but the latter did not identify it as her sister. The version of drowning was not confirmed, and the search for Liga continued. Andrew, on the other hand, was convinced that his wife had been kidnapped by local gangs for the purpose of selling her. He tried to infiltrate these gangs to get more information, but was exposed and warned that repeated contact with the gangs would result in him having to leave the country. A month after Liga went missing, there are still no leads to help find the girl. Ilza continued to look for her sister. She visited Kovalam beach every day and watched people. On one such day, she spotted a boat and she had a theory. The only way to leave the beach unnoticed was the boat. On April 17, 2018, after a forced hiatus, Andrew returned to India to continue his search. Ilza and Andrew entered a new struggle to find the Skramain League, but the body was still not found. The search was complicated by the fact that Liga Skroman was a tourist and a citizen of another country. The Latvian Foreign Ministry said the embassy was in constant contact with Liga's relatives and was also working closely with the Indian police. The Latvian embassy also appealed to the Indian Foreign Ministry with a request for special support in the search for Liga, as well as the honorary consul of Latvia in India, whose consular district includes the region where Liga disappeared. At the request of the Kerala state government, the Indian Navy and Air Force will search for missing Latvian citizen Liga Skroman. The search operation involved an M-32 transport plane, Gemini inflatable boats, underwater sonar, and 5 deep-sea divers. But even this search operation did not bring the desired result, and Liga was still not found. The search continued. By this time, all local residents knew about the missing tourist from Latvia. They supported and sympathized with Andrew and Ilza. On April 20th, 2018, Ilza's phone received the longest-awaited yet most horrific call of her life. A body had been found in the mangrove jungle. She and Andrew drove to the designated spot where the police were waiting for them for the boat crossing. Ilza's heart was pounding like never before. She felt that for the moment, she would have to swim the path that the League had traveled to its demise. On the spot, horror overwhelmed her. Ilza saw her sister's clothes. The shirt and leggings on the body were recognized by Ilse, but the jacket and shoes did not belong to Liga. It remained unclear how, with whom, and why Liga had gotten to a place that could only be accessed by going through Panatura from Samudra Beach. 2 women confirmed that they had witnessed Liga traveling alone into the mangrove forest. But why would a girl who is being treated for depression and is already alone take a boat to a remote place in the forest? The body was shifted to the Medical College Hospital where it underwent an autopsy, which was captured on video camera. The police said they could not confirm the identity of the body until DNA analysis was completed. According to the city police commissioner, the body was badly mutilated, with a head lying nearby. Police have tentatively identified the dead woman as missing tourist Liga Crymble. In favor of the investigators' conclusions is also the fact that the victim was identified by Liga's relatives by her hair and clothes. One of the versions of rescue services in India was poisoning. There are poisonous pong trees in the mangrove forest, and she could have accidentally or intentionally eaten their fruit and poisoned herself. Between 1989 and 1999, more than 500 people died from poisoning by its fruits in Kerala alone. It looked like another nonsense, because the person was hanging upside down, but there was no head. It is obvious that if Liga was poisoned, her body would have been in a completely different position, and the head would have been in place. The Indian authorities were talking utter nonsense. Based on the information about Liga's complex psychological problem, the investigators also assumed the version that Liga had voluntarily left her life. Ilse feared that the police would try to pass off her sister's murder as a voluntary departure from life. Although a rope had been found at the scene, and it could be concluded that the hiker had hanged herself, Ilse demanded a separate explanation for the missing head. "Don't tell me it's lost," Ilse said sarcastically in yet another appeal on the internet. Breathlessly, Ilse and the anxious public waited for the results of the forensic tests. The forensic results were overwhelming. The forensic report stated that there were areas of blood pooling in part of Liga Crymble's brain, as well as bruising in the neck area. The autopsy revealed that the woman had been strangled by several people. She was killed in an attempted violent attack. There were external injuries on the body, probably sustained during the struggle. The fact of violence could not be confirmed as the body was in the decomposition stage. There were characteristic injuries on the cartilage in her throat, which indicated that someone had squeezed her throat with force. The trauma was severe enough to be fatal. According to forensic experts, there were blood clots in her brain which confirmed strangulation. They also noted that there were bruises on her neck and legs. A total of 9 wounds were recorded on Liga Crymble's body. In view of the above, the police no longer considered the version of voluntary death. According to the autopsy, it was determined that Liga was murdered. Liga died after resisting or struggling. Ilse breathed a sigh of relief and hoped that the police would soon find her sister's killers. But there were complications as well. As part of the investigation, the police began checking out local drug dealers and card players. In addition, during interviews with local residents, 2 women said that they saw Liga walking alone to the place where her body was later found, but the police said they did not fully trust their words. Meanwhile, Liga's relatives have accused Indian police of incompetence, claiming that if the girl had been searched for immediately, the tragedy could have been avoided. The 33-year-old Latvian tourist is believed to have been grabbed from a nearby beach and transported by boat before being strangled. A special team of investigators has begun looking for those responsible for the crime. About 40 suspects were interviewed. However, arrests were planned to be made a few days later after the law enforcers had enough evidence. The Indian police conducted an investigation that led to the arrest of 2 men who were eventually accused of killing Liga Crymblle. Police revealed that Liga Crymblle was lured by 2 men who then abused her before dismembering her body. The alleged assailants, who are now in custody, are local dealers in illegal substances. The suspects fully confessed under torture. Both the accused were pimps and were also dealing in illegal substances. Police said the autopsy did not reveal much evidence because League's body was badly decomposed. Andrew Jordan filed a petition in Superior Court calling for a review of the felony murder case. He believed that more people were involved in the woman's murder. In the petition, he pointed out that both defendants later recanted their pleas of guilty to the crime. According to Jordan, the men may have confessed because they were tortured, which, as it turns out, is a common practice in India. However, the Supreme Court of India denied the murdered woman's common-law husband, Liga, a review of the case. Due to lack of direct evidence, the trial was postponed for 2 months. But Andrew was outraged by this attitude of the authorities. He had earlier accused the Kerala authorities and police of incompetence and attempts to cover up Leia's murder so as not to scare away tourists. Both the suspects' lawyers asked for and got a postponement. By law, they have the right to postpone the case once without giving any reason. The more they postponed, the more he was convinced the case was unclean. However, both suspects were in custody. Investigation revealed that 32-year-old Umesh and 28-year-old Udayakumar offered Liga weed, and when she was drugged, they used it and then strangled and decapitated her. It is noted that the 2 men apprehended for the murder of Liga and had previously committed similar crimes on numerous occasions. Both of them worked for a food delivery company in the Kerala capital and earned money as illegal tour guides in their spare time. Umesh and Udayan had been charged with destruction of evidence, murder, poisoning, kidnapping, and rape. The place where Liga's corpse was found and had earlier served as a pleasure ground for Umesh. He used to take men there. 13 criminal cases had been filed against him, including 6 for sexual assault and 1 for attempted murder. Several of Umesh's victims have testified against him. Liga, along with both men, were seen in the area by several people. They were initially silent, but confessed to everything after the body was found. The detainees confessed to police that they'd committed the murder while attempting violence. They were apprehended, but had previously claimed that they had only seen Liga in Kovalam. The men pleaded guilty after repeated interrogations. On December 6, 2022, the court finally sentenced both men to life in prison. The court also recognized that the criminals must pay compensation to Liga sister Ilsa, 165,000 rupees each. We would like to note that there has been a whole series of such crimes in this country recently. Young girls are regularly subjected to violence. The problem of crime in India is very acute. Due to the huge number of sexual acts against minors, the government has introduced the death penalty. It is also worth noting that if the relatives, and primarily Liga's sister, had not been persistent, had they not involved the press by organizing a press conference and an influential MP, it is obvious that the local police would hardly have seriously investigated the case. For at first a theory was put forward that the League had allegedly passed away voluntarily, and as it now turns out, this is not the first incident in this very place where Liga was found. After this story, I would like to warn once again all women who are frivolous about the dangers of traveling alone in India. Do not seek spiritual enlightenment in distant, dangerous, and uncharted countries. Take care of yourself.
Wake up. Is anyone alive in this house? Judy cheerfully entered the home of her sister, Linda Slayton. The morning of September 4th was normal, but something seemed off. Judy often visited her nephews, and today she came to their home as usual. A cup of hot coffee and a friendly conversation with her sister was how their day usually began. "Where are you, little slackers?" Judy smiled, peering into the room of her nephews, who were sleepily rubbing their eyes. She was surprised to see Linda still asleep, for she usually woke up before the boys left for school. Judy left the house and noticed that the window in her sister's room was wide open and one of the curtains was missing. It was strange. "Why aren't you in school yet? Is your mom sick? Why is she still sleeping?" Judy walked restlessly toward her sister's bedroom. "Linda Slayton, I want to see you." Judy knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The next instant, the sight that came into view made her heart sink. Her sister's body lay across the bed, her head hanging to the floor. The young woman was half undressed and a wire hanger was wrapped around her neck. There was no sign of a struggle in the room. The closet was open, but otherwise, everything looked normal, Linda's things lying in their places. Upon seeing her sister's body, Judy screamed, and the janitor working outside called the police. The police arrived and asked the children to leave the house, which had now become a crime scene. Jeff was able to walk past his mother's room without looking at her body. Tim, on the other hand, looked into the room and saw his mother dead. The boys were sent to their grandparents' house for the duration of the investigation. That fateful morning was the beginning of a mysterious and dark story. It changed their lives forever. Linda Slayton was born on a spring day, March 8, 1950. The girl dreamed of a large and happy family. Her fate, however, did not turn out the way she wanted. At the age of 19, Linda entered into marriage with Frank Slayton. At this age, she was already a mother. 3 years before the wedding, the couple had their first son, Jeffrey, and after another year, a younger son, Timothy, was born. And only after another year, Linda managed to convince the father of their children, Frank, to become a family. But, alas, this marriage turned out to be far from her expectations. Frank, after becoming a husband and father, disappointed his family. He turned out to be a cruel man. His outbursts of anger regularly fell on his wife and sons. Jeff and Tim's memories of their childhood were filled with nightmares. Their father was an aggressive alcoholic who kept his family in suspense. Linda often thought about divorce, but fear and addiction prevented her from taking that step. However, in 1974, after 9 long years of marriage, she gathered the last vestiges of strength and determination. Leaving behind the hell that was their family, Linda took her sons and left Frank Slayton. It was the first step towards a new life where Linda hoped she could give her sons the security and happiness they had been denied for so long. She didn't yet know the trials that lay ahead, including that terrible day that became fateful for her family. After the divorce, Linda and her 2 children lived at 303 North Brunel Parkway in Lakeland, Florida, which was one of Polk County's densely populated cities. In 1981, it was a place where business was booming, and new residential neighborhoods were being built on every corner. These were mostly duplexes where large families settled. Lakeland, with its abundance of lawns and greenery, was very attractive to residents. One of the many duplex homes belonged to the Slayton family. Despite this, they didn't stay in it for long. It is known that Linda and her sons moved to Florida from Hartzella, Alabama, just 2 weeks before the horrific crime. What could have led to such a gruesome tragedy? Perhaps Linda brought not only her children with her, but also dark issues from her past. After her divorce, Linda Slayton began a new life as a single mom. She strived to give her children everything she could, torn between work and home responsibilities. Linda didn't have a car, so her sons either walked to school or neighbors drove them. Despite the hardships, Linda never gave up and tried to provide her children with everything they needed. In addition to school activities, the boys also participated in the soccer section. But since it was not always easy to get there without a car, Coach Joe became their savior. He regularly drove the brothers from home to the stadium and back. A week before the tragic events on September 4th, Linda was actively preparing for her mother's move. She was sure that a woman living with them would be able to help Linda cope with the daily household chores and create an atmosphere of comfort and family harmony in the house. On the evening of September 3rd, Jeff returned home from a workout. He felt an empty feeling in his stomach, but there was no food in the house, so he decided to go to his grandmother's house. When he returned around 9:30 p.m., his brother and mother were not in the house. The boy turned on the TV in an attempt to distract himself, but his anxious thoughts did not leave him. The quarrel with his mother, which had occurred the day before, did not give him peace. He tried to put it out of his mind, but when he came home and did not find his relatives, he began to feel a strange longing. Usually at this time, their house was in a state of excitement. Linda's mother was cooking dinner in the kitchen, the smell of delicious food filling the house, and her younger brother Tim was merrily hanging around, sometimes running up to Jeff, hoping for a conversation. But sensing his brother's displeasure, he ran back to his mother.
These moments were repeated several times until everyone was gathered around the table for dinner. Around 11:30 p.m., the noise and laughter of family members in the hallway interrupted Jeff's musings. His heart began to beat more calmly. His mother and brother came home, and Jeff finally went back to watching the movie that was coming to an end. At dinner, Linda talked about going to spend the evening with the neighbors and playing cards, but before that, she decided to do some housework. When his younger brother Tim went to bed, Jeff stayed and helped his mom wash the dishes. Before going to bed, he decided to stop by her room to apologize for the fight that happened between them earlier. Jeff remembers that his last words were, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow." If only he had known that those words would be the last words he was able to say to his mother. September 4th, 1981 was a tragic day in the lives of two brothers, 12-year-old Tim and 15-year-old Jeff. It was then, on that terrible day, that they found their mother, Linda Slayton, dead in her bed. At the time, Linda was only 31 years old. Who could have committed such horrific cruelty against the mother of two defenseless children? Was it someone they knew, or was Linda the victim of a random attack? After Jeff and Tim left for their grandmother's house, Sergeant Edgar Pickett of the Lakeland Police Department arrived on the scene. He was the first detective to begin investigating this terrible tragedy. As soon as he arrived, police officers, reporters, and ambulances streamed to the house. The place was cordoned off. Yellow tape reading, "Crime scene, no trespassing," was stretched around the house. Sergeant Pickett was the first to uncover the most important piece of evidence in the case. On a window where the curtain was missing, he discovered a palm print that did not belong to the murdered Linda. This footprint could have been an important DNA sample, but at the time DNA testing was not yet widespread. To find out the exact cause of Linda's death, her body was sent for an autopsy. It revealed bruises on her shoulders, arms, and neck. The fact that she was half naked indicated a possible rape. After a detailed autopsy, it became clear that Linda had first been severely beaten, then abused, and then strangled with a hanger from her own closet. This horrific scenario became the starting point of the investigation, but there were still many questions. To solve the mystery of Linda Slayton's murder, the police decided to go through the genealogical tree of the Slayton family. The first suspect turned out to be Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. Information about him indicated that he was a violent and aggressive man who often abused his wife and children and showed no concern for the family. Quite expectedly, Frank immediately came under the suspicion of the police. He was detained for questioning, but it soon became clear that he was in Alabama on the night of the murder. Nevertheless, the police did not rule him out as a suspect. The second suspect was Linda's eldest son, Jeff. On the day before the murder, he and his mother had a serious argument. According to witnesses, the relationship between Linda and her son had been strained recently. Jeff, as the eldest child in the family, had experienced the full brunt of living with an abusive father and then with his mother, who was raising his brothers alone. Their frequent conflicts were in plain sight, but Jeff always tried to smooth over quarrels and make peace with his mother, just as he did the night before Linda's murder. The police conducted 2 polygraph tests for Jeff, and both times the results were negative, thus eliminating him from the list of suspects. Third on the suspect list was Linda's boyfriend, whose name has not been released. This white man was a close friend of Linda's and often socialized with her children, but polygraph testing revealed nothing suspicious, and police were forced to clear him of suspicion. After Linda's funeral, the family gradually began to get the brothers' lives back to normal. The boys went back to school and tried to suppress in their minds the horrible event that had occurred at 303 North Brunel Parkway. Tim continued to attend soccer practice, and he always felt support from his team and coaches. Coach Joe stayed true to his promise and continued to give Tim rides home after practice. A month after the tragedy, Tim put a picture of the team and coach by his bed. Weeks turned to weeks, months turned to years, but the case of Linda's murder remained unsolved. The Slayton brothers had to accept the hard reality of their new life. Their mother had been murdered, and only their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris, were left with them to support them through this difficult time. It had been a full 17 years since the horrific murder of Linda Slayton. The years have passed, and the boys who lost their mother have grown into grown men full of love and care for their own families. Both brothers started families, and Jeff had 2 children. However, he never forgot that last night. I didn't hear anything at all. Even the neighbors claim they didn't hear anything suspicious that night. It weighs heavily on me. He often repeated in conversation with his loved ones. Sometimes, sitting in front of the television waiting for dinner, while his wife fussed in the kitchen and his children ran around him, Jeff would catch a glimpse of the past. At such moments, he was taken back to his childhood home, to the last evening with his mother. The unsettling feelings that had gripped him that last evening seemed to foretell a horror that would change his life forever. The voices of his children and wife, each time as a rescue, brought Jeff back to reality. Despite the successful lives the brothers have built, they have never stopped following the investigation and have worked hard to keep the case alive. They regularly return to Lakeland to see if there was any news in their mother's case. In an interview, Tim said, "No matter how many investigators are replaced, we always remind them that we are waiting to find whoever killed our mom. The burden is on us, and I can't let it go." In 2001, detectives finally had a new thread that could lead to the solution of this long-standing mystery. In the same neighborhood where Linda was murdered, police arrested a man named Jimmy Ulmer, who had similar mannerisms to Linda's killer. He was charged with the attempted murder of a little girl he had tried to pull through the window of her room. The police began to scrutinize his connections and alibis and discovered that he was now already sentenced to 80 years in prison for other crimes. For the police, he became the prime suspect. However, a small problem arose. By that time, Jimmy had already passed away, and it was impossible to conduct DNA testing. However, Jimmy's mother agreed to provide a sample of her DNA. Unfortunately, the results did not match the sample found at Linda's murder scene. The investigation again went unanswered. In 1998, the investigator who had been looking into Linda Slayton's murder, Edgar Pickett, resigned and was replaced by a new detective, Brad Grace. Grace discovered an unidentified DNA sample that had been collected at the crime scene back in 1981. He decided to send that sample to the state's largest laboratory, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, to try to identify Linda's killer from the DNA. By 1999, the department already had the means to conduct such tests, and Detective Grace sprang into action. He reviewed the list of suspects and decided to collect DNA samples from each of them. In 2001, he was confident that he could find the perpetrator through his DNA. He first contacted the Slayton brothers and asked them to submit DNA samples for comparison with samples found at the crime scene. The results of the analysis completely ruled the brothers out as suspects. Detective Grace then contacted Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. Frank, after Linda's death, had reevaluated his life and was living a good life. Frank voluntarily gave up his DNA samples. Again, no matches were found. In 2005, Grace submitted DNA samples from the unknown perpetrator to the FBI to be tested against the data in the federal database. These comparisons were made regularly, but were inconclusive. Eventually, 17 years after Linda Slayton's murder, Detective Grace retired and was replaced by Detectives Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley. After 3 more years of investigation, Tammy Hathcock learned of a new DNA recognition technology developed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. She sent a DNA sample from the crime scene to expert Cecile Moore. Using a genealogical database and other documents, Cecile Moore compiled a family tree that led to the person suspected of killing Linda Slayton. This moment proved to be a turning point in the investigation and a shocking one for the Slayton brothers. The face of the killer was in one of the photographs in Tim's bedroom. That man turned out to be Joseph Clinton Mills, also known as Coach Joe. Police began investigating Mills' background and found that he had been charged with grand larceny and forging a will, but was not convicted of it. His fingerprints and palm prints were kept in police databases. To establish Joseph Mills' guilt, police had to match his DNA to that found at the scene of Linda Slayton's murder. Detectives decided to obtain a sample of Mills' DNA without his knowledge. The veracity of this information is unknown, but this is the version that is included in the case.
Police collected trash from a dumpster at Mills's house and found a Band-Aid with traces of blood on it. This patch was sent for examination. At this time, detectives were investigating the suspect's background. Joseph Mills had spent most of his life in the town of Kettleman, which is only 30 minutes from the crime scene. He had a family, children, and grandchildren. 2 weeks later, the lab's response came back. The DNA from Linda Slayton's murder scene matched Joseph Mills' DNA. This result became a key piece of evidence in the case, and Joseph Mills was arrested and charged with the murder of Linda Slayton. In December 2019, Joseph Mills was arrested and taken to police for questioning. He was only 20 years old at the time of Linda Slayton's murder in 1981. Detectives conducted an interview with Mills at the time, but it was done over the phone, and he did not become a suspect in the murder. Now, after years of investigation, it was impossible for Mills to deny his involvement in the crime. According to his testimony, on the night of the murder, he had come to Linda's home with her consent for sexual relations. But detectives doubted his version. They speculated that Mills had been watching Linda for some time because he regularly drove her children to practice. According to investigators' version, after the coach brought the boy home from practice, he waited until the house was empty before sneaking into Linda's room through a window. Hiding in a closet, he waited until she was alone in the room. He then came out of hiding, beat and abused Linda, and strangled her with a wire hanger from her own closet. At trial, Joseph Mills was found guilty of first-degree murder and rape. The investigation and trial finally brought long-awaited justice to this horrific crime that had gone unsolved for years. The sons of the murdered woman were still left in shock and could not understand what motivated Joseph to kill their mother. The court hearing was tense. Linda Slayton's children, Tim and Jeff, sat on a spectator bench defending the memory of their mother. At the center of attention was Joseph Clinton Mills, Coach Joe. This man who once seemed like a role model sat in an accusatory cage. His gaze was cold and indifferent, as if nothing had happened. Tim Slayton, the oldest of the brothers, looked at the man he had once revered and now saw in him the face of evil. The fire of indignation burned in Tim's eyes, and he jumped to his feet, turning to Joseph. "Why? I just want to understand why, Joe. Why did you kill our mom? Why did you take her away from us? We were so happy." Mills only mumbled back, "I'm a good man." The Slayton family never received an apology or remorse from him. Probably even the killer himself had a hard time explaining his actions. This came as a shock to Tim, because as a child he had considered Coach Joe a role model. Now he is left with only questions and painful memories. Joseph Mills was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As if a heavy stone had fallen from the Slayton brothers' shoulders, their mother was finally avenged. And while the brothers console themselves with the thought that the killer will spend the rest of his days in prison, they are still furious at the fact that Joseph Mills enjoyed freedom for nearly 40 years while they lost their mother. Linda Slayton's story, her tragic death, and years of investigation have left an incredible mark on her sons. Tim and Jeff Slayton, two brothers who not only witnessed this tragedy, but also became first-hand participants in the investigation, share their experiences and feelings. "He kept asking us how the case was going," says Tim, the older of the brothers. "He didn't ask specific questions. He just wanted to know if there was any news on the case, if there was any new evidence, and I just told him that nothing had changed." Tim still can't believe that his mother's killer was a man he considered a friend and respected. The picture of him standing behind Joseph Mills has always reminded him that life goes on, but without his mom. Jeff, the younger brother, always thinks about how his life would have turned out if Mom had been alive. This tragedy has left an unbearable void in his heart that nothing can fill. Despite all the hardship and suffering, the Slayton brothers try to live a full life for their mother, Linda Slayton. They visit her grave regularly, placing fresh flowers and praying that she knows they will never forget her and will continue to fight for justice. Linda Slayton's story is one of fortitude, of incredible endurance, and of the fact that even after the most horrific losses, the love and memory of loved ones lives on in the hearts of those left behind. On March 1st, 2022, at the age of 77, Roger Kemp passed away in his home in Livewood.
He was the best husband and father who cared for his family until the very last minute. However, a single memory from 20 years ago haunted Roger until his death, as it had completely changed his life. For 2 long years, he was forced to become a meticulous investigator to find the person responsible for his only daughter's untimely demise. If not for Roger's involvement, the case might have remained unsolved as the police were nearly powerless. But beyond the police, there was Roger, who could not allow the criminal to go unpunished. Let's return to the past and see what happened on that tragic day. Let's begin. Our story took place in the small suburb of Livewood, Kansas, a very small and safe town in the state. Here, all the neighbors know each other by name and wish you a good day upon meeting. The morning of June 18, 2002, started as usual for 19-year-old Alexandra Kemp. Her father had gone to work, her younger brother was still in bed, and her mother was making a delicious breakfast. Alexandra didn't finish her coffee because she was in a hurry to get to work. Allie, as her loved ones affectionately called her, had just finished her first year of college and returned to her hometown for the summer holidays. She got a job as a lifeguard at an outdoor public pool, where her boyfriend and brother were already working. That day there were almost no visitors, and Allie calmly inspected the area and cleaned the auxiliary premises. Allie entered the pump room and turned around when an unfamiliar voice greeted her. She politely asked him to leave the restricted area and pointed to the door, but he attacked her and started tearing at her clothes. Allie hit him in the face, but he was much stronger. She tried to scream, but he covered her mouth with his hand, and the noise from the operating pumps left no chance to be heard. The next moment, Allie lost consciousness. Sometime later, her brother Tyler came to the pool to take over her shift. He saw her personal belongings on a table, but could not find her anywhere. He searched all around, calling her by name, but Allie did not respond. In a panic, the young man called their father. Roger dropped everything and rushed to the pool. Together with Tyler, they carefully inspected the surrounding area, and to his relief, Roger found that Allie was not in the pool. Upon entering the pump room, Roger saw a large piece of tarpaulin. Shining a flashlight in the dim room, he noticed a pool of blood on the floor, and then a foot sticking out from under the tarp. The father threw off the tarp and cried out at the sight. He fell to his knees, trying to bring her to her senses, but she was unresponsive. At 5:29 p.m., Roger Kemp called the emergency services to report that his daughter had been fatally injured. Throughout the call, the father tried to revive his daughter. He tenderly covered her with his jacket, but blood continued to seep from the inflicted wounds. Roger talked to her and pleadingly asked her not to leave, but the girl was unconscious. The victim was urgently taken to the hospital, where the death of 19-year-old Allie Kemp was confirmed. "I hoped she was still conscious and could hear me, but she never came back," Roger said shortly after arriving at the local hospital. Alexandra Elizabeth Kemp suffered multiple head injuries from blunt force trauma, with a pool of blood nearby. Her shirt was torn, she was without pants and underwear, and there were signs of strangulation on her neck. Several of her fingers were broken, and her nails were torn off, suggesting that she had been brutally assaulted before being deprived of life. The pump room, where Allie's body was found, was in disarray, with items strewn about chaotically. It became clear that there had been a fierce struggle between Allie and her assailant, in which she did not give up, but he proved to be stronger. After her life was declared ended, the victim's body was sent for forensic examination, and the crime scene was thoroughly inspected. Unfortunately, the weapon used in the crime was not found either in the pump room or on the pool premises. However, a blood-stained tube of ointment, usually kept in the first aid kit, was found at the crime scene, which investigators found peculiar. They needed to determine why it was found near the victim's body. The ointment tube and its cap were collected for analysis. Police Chief Craig Hill, who inspected the crime scene, expressed his condolences to the parents of the deceased Allie Kemp and stated that in his 35 years of service, this was probably the most horrific crime that could occur in the Livewood community. This crime shocked the quiet town and left too many questions, both for the public and for the investigators.
The investigation was puzzled, as one of the main questions in the crime against the young woman was the motive. The first suspected motive was robbery, but her purse and all its contents were untouched, which completely ruled out this theory. The second suspected motive was an assault, but after receiving the forensic examination report, it was established that Ali had not been subjected to intimate violence. The lack of either of these two motives, and indeed any motive at all, made the crime mysterious and strange even to experienced investigators. So who needed to end the life of a young woman whose life had just begun in such a brutal way? Alexandra Elizabeth Kemp was born on October 11, 1982, in the city of Leavenworth. She was the long-awaited first child in the Kemp family and their only daughter. Ali grew up in a loving home with her parents and two brothers in the idyllic, tree-lined suburb of Livewood. She graduated from high school with honors, loved soccer and poetry, and was voted the most beautiful girl in 8th grade. Following her dreams, Ali enrolled at Kansas State University. In 2002, she had just completed her first year at university and returned to her hometown of Livewood, where her family and boyfriend awaited her. She took a job as part of the service staff at the local pool, just 4 blocks from her family's home. It was a wonderful job at a nearby pool where her brother and boyfriend were already working. Thus, Ali was a young, promising woman who grew up surrounded by love and care, and who certainly could not have had any enemies. Investigators continued to explore various theories about the assault and interviewed friends and acquaintances of Ali to get a more complete picture of the day of the crime. One of the first suspects was Ali's boyfriend. Phil House had known Ali since school, and by 2002, they had been a couple for over 5 years. It seemed Phil had no reason to harm Ali, but the police had to consider him a suspect. During questioning, Phil explained that Ali had replaced him at the pool at 2 p.m., after which he went to another job. He was there until 4 p.m., then he was at a friend's house playing video games until he received a call about Ali being in the hospital. Phil's alibi was confirmed by colleagues and friends he had been playing games with. However, the police did obtain crucial information from him. It turned out that Ali had called him at 2:52 p.m., but Phil couldn't answer. When he called her back at 3:44 p.m., she did not pick up the phone, which led investigators to suspect that Ali met her tragic fate during this time frame. Despite the desire to solve the case quickly, this clue did not bring the police any closer to finding the criminal. There was hope in the testimony of potential witnesses, as there should have been plenty on a summer day at a public pool. However, due to unfortunate weather conditions, the pool was almost empty that day. The search for any clues or testimonies was progressing very slowly. A few days later, after re-interviewing the pool staff and the surrounding areas, it was established that on the day of the crime, 2 employees from a lawn service company were working in the parking lot. They were brought in for questioning, where they described noticing a car driving around the parking lot in circles around 2:40 p.m., occasionally leaving but then returning. They were able to provide a clear description of the suspicious vehicle, a beige 1980 Ford pickup. Although the police did not have the vehicle's license number, they now had a piece of important information. However, even more valuable information came from one of Ali's friends. The testimony of Ali's friend, Laurel Wynn, helped provide a description of the suspected criminal. It turned out that around 3 p.m. that day, Ali called her friend Laurel and asked her to keep her company during her shift at the pool, as the day was cloudy and not very warm, so there were hardly any visitors. Laurel agreed, and after a while her car pulled into the pool parking lot. She called Ali, but there was no answer. Not seeing Ali outside, Laurel blew loudly on a lifeguard whistle, thinking it would be amusing. At that moment, a man exited the pump room, pretending to talk on the phone. Laurel thought he might be Ali's boss, so she quickly left the pool to avoid causing her friend any trouble. As she left the pool area, the man turned around and waved at Laurel, allowing her to remember his face. Laurel did not wait for a call from her friend and left. Assuming she had seen the criminal, the police created and published a composite sketch based on Laurel's description, hoping it would lead them to the criminal. Thus, a very accurate sketch of the presumed criminal was made. The sketch and the description of the suspicious vehicle were broadcasted on local television. Undoubtedly, such publicity increased the chances of identifying and capturing the criminal, and the police indeed received a massive number of reports from people who believed they had seen this man. This led the investigation to its first suspect, James Drider. A young man, Drider owned an old Ford pickup and closely resembled the composite sketch. He lived in Olade, approximately 20 minutes' drive from Livewood, where he worked as a mechanic in a small auto repair shop. Upon obtaining the address of the presumed suspect, police visited him at his workplace. However, James vehemently denied any involvement in the assault, and he had an alibi since he was at work all day. His boss confirmed that he was indeed at the auto shop on June 18th. Thus, despite a striking resemblance to the composite, James Drider was excluded from the list of suspects. The search continued. Months passed and the trail began to cool, but Roger never gave up. While detectives worked on every lead, he pursued new ones. Roger relentlessly conducted his own investigations. He regularly visited the police station, offering various ideas for capturing the criminal. Roger's unyielding efforts led him to appear on America's Most Wanted, where, in addition to sharing Ali's story, the composite sketch of the presumed suspect was shown. The popular show was broadcast not only on local television but also nationally. A new wave of messages flooded into police stations. Each message was meticulously processed, but for various reasons, each newly emerged suspect was almost immediately ruled out. Ali's boyfriend of 5 years, Phil House, also assisted. He initiated a virtual hunt, sending out emails to university students. He urged them to look at the composite sketch and watch the America's Most Wanted episode focusing on Ali's case. A reward of $50,000 was offered for any information leading to an arrest. Despite all efforts, the case again reached a dead end. However, 6 months after Ali's murder, detectives received new information about the previously familiar James Drider. It turned out that in January 2003, news outlets in neighboring Colorado reported the search for a man responsible for 3 assaults. Roger recognized Drider from the wanted sketch, who had been previously excluded as a suspect in Ali's murder and was now wanted for assaults. Despite Drider's alibi on the day of Ali Kemp's murder, the police now had no doubts they had found their suspect. But first, they needed to prove James's involvement. The man had no prior convictions, so he wasn't in the database, and investigators couldn't compare DNA. They needed to check this individual again and obtain his DNA to compare it with the DNA found at the crime scene. By this point, James Drider was on the run, making him very difficult to locate. It took the police 3 weeks to find him. At a gas station in Utah, Drider failed to pay for his fuel, and the staff detained him, calling the police. James Drider faced charges for 3 assaults and possibly also for the murder of Ali Kemp. When police compared his DNA sample with the sample from the crime scene, they were disappointed to find no matches. James Drider was a serial offender, but he did not end Ali Kemp's life. This was a major setback as the investigation had come incredibly close to apprehending the suspect, only for detectives to have to start over from scratch. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with the police still having no new suspects in Ali Kemp's case. 2 years passed, and the police's interest in the case gradually waned, but not Ali's father, Roger. He did everything within his power to find his daughter's assailant, though his options were limited. He periodically contacted USA Today, which published the composite sketch of the presumed suspect. Roger desperately searched for a broad-faced, somewhat bald man. He posted wanted notices throughout the city. His goal as a devoted father was not only to find the criminal, but also to keep his daughter's story alive in the public consciousness. Then, one day, Roger had a simple and brilliant idea. At the city's entrance, he saw a billboard. It occurred to him that hundreds, even thousands of people saw this billboard daily. Why not place the composite sketch on it? He contacted an advertising company to rent the billboard. When the company's management learned about Mr. Kemp's story, they offered not just 1, but 8 billboards along highways near Livewood for the poster, free of charge.
The estimated total daily viewership of these billboards was about 10,000, and Roger's efforts finally began to bear fruit. 2 years after Ali Kemp's murder, police started receiving reports of people resembling the sketch. The billboard, along with a higher reward and television advertisements, led to a flurry of tips, including one about a young man named Benjamin Appleby. This individual lived in Bantam, Connecticut, where he was known as Ted Hoover. The 29-year-old man lived under the pseudonym Hoover to avoid prosecution for an intimate offense from 1997. He owned a Ford pickup of the same beige color as the vehicle the suspect was believed to drive. It later turned out that Ted Hoover worked in pool maintenance in 2002, specifically at the pool where Ali was murdered. Armed with this information, police went to question Ted Hoover at his home. During the conversation, he behaved uncertainly and was visibly nervous. At the end of the discussion, Ted was asked to provide a DNA sample to clear himself from the list of suspects. He was clearly unprepared for this request and tried to evade it by making excuses. Initially, he asked to postpone providing samples until he could speak with his lawyer and requested some time to think. The next day, the detective contacted Ted Hoover's lawyer, who informed him that Ted did not want his DNA entered into the national database and thus was opposed to voluntarily providing a DNA sample to the police. Detectives attempted to press the lawyer to provide a letter of assurance that the DNA would not be entered into any database and would only be used within the scope of Ali Kemp's case materials. The lawyer requested a pause to relay this information to his client. However, 2 days later, the lawyer responded that his client was still against providing his DNA to the police. The detectives were convinced that this individual had something to hide. They remembered that they had spoken with Ted Hoover at the crime scene of Ali's death many years ago, although he did not seem suspicious at the time. The police had questioned him in connection with Ali's case, but were unable to achieve the desired breakthrough. The investigators had no choice but to secure a warrant for the compulsory collection of Ted Hoover's DNA. On March 24, 2004, armed with a warrant, they returned to Ted Hoover's residence, only to find the house empty. The man had fled. Ted Hoover was officially declared wanted on suspicion of Ali Kemp's murder. During the search, Roger continued to play an active role. He returned to the proven method of publishing posters on billboards across neighboring states. He purchased over 500 billboard advertisements. Ted Hoover's face was displayed in Colorado, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska. To fund such a massive manhunt, Roger Kemp had to spend all his savings and even sell the home his family had lived in for over 20 years, as the entire billboard campaign now cost over $100,000. And it was not in vain. In August 2004, the police received a tip from Missouri that someone recognized the person from the billboard. However, the tip mentioned that this individual was now living not under the name Ted Hoover, but as Benjamin Appleby. The police went to the address provided in the tip, and indeed, they found the man known to them as Ted Hoover. He was arrested on the spot on suspicion of murder. The police legally obtained a saliva sample from him. Their suspicions were confirmed when the DNA of Benjamin Appleby, aka Ted Hoover, matched the DNA found at the crime scene. Benjamin had several prior run-ins with the law, ranging from robbery to intimate offenses. The police in Connecticut arrested him on an earlier warrant charging him with indecent exposure. When questioned about Ali's murder, he confessed to the police that he approached the girl he liked to flirt with her, but she did not reciprocate. When he tried to touch her, she pushed him away, causing Benjamin to lose control and assault her. Later, Benjamin was charged with murder and attempted assault. He was found guilty on both counts. "I strangled her, I guess. I don't know why the hell I did it," said Benjamin Appleby in a recorded interview. According to Appleby, he touched her. "Not strongly," he said, and when she resisted, he began to strangle and beat the 19-year-old girl. Then the detectives learned the horrifying reason why the antiseptic ointment was open. Appleby tried to assault Ali when she lost consciousness and he needed lubrication. In his defense, Benjamin Appleby said that he simply snapped, headed back to his car, and drove away. On December 10, 2005, on the final day of the trial against Benjamin Appleby, aka Ted Hoover, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He was found guilty under Kansas law, 50 years in prison with no chance for parole until 2054. However, Benjamin Appleby, who has been serving his sentence for several years now, has expressed doubts about the fairness of his sentence under the Kansas Hard 50 law. He argued that since the factors that led to his Hard 50 were determined by a judge, not a jury, as required by a previous U.S. Supreme Court ruling, Kansas law automatically required that his sentence be modified. Prosecutors contend that the state law does not apply to Benjamin Appleby's case, and that the Hard 50 should remain in effect. Roger Kemp warned the public that reducing the prison term for Benjamin Appleby would put other young women and girls at risk. This marked the end of Roger Kemp's struggle and his pursuit of the man who ended his daughter's life. His relentless determination to see Ali's assailant face justice led to a rather unusual idea. He wanted to use highway billboards so that every passerby could see the composite sketch. Roger Kemp's inventive idea of using billboards to reach more people proved very successful. Several states across the country decided to adopt similar measures with high success rates. After Benjamin Appleby's conviction, Roger Kemp founded the Ali Kemp Educational Foundation, named Take Defense. It offers self-defense training to girls and young women aged 12 to 23. Workshops are conducted nationwide. Participants have sent hundreds of testimonials from women saying that the training prevented attacks and even saved their lives. Until his last days, Kemp personally spoke at events and before each local class. Over 70,000 people across the country have taken this self-defense course. Later, he started a self-defense program for girls and women of all ages, named the Ali Kemp Educational Foundation, or simply TAKE. It teaches women how to protect themselves in dangerous situations. In 2011, Roger Kemp was also awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal for his work with the foundation. Out of 6,000 nominees, Kemp was one of 13 people to receive one of the highest honors a civilian can receive from the president. He believed his daughter would still be alive if she had known how to defend herself and, as a result, hoped to teach other women to do the same. Years after the tragic loss of his only beloved daughter, he still could not bear to describe the brutal assault on her and did not wish to recall that horrific day that completely changed his life. He ended her life because he attempted to attack her, and it's very hard for me to say assault her. He ended her life and then tried to assault her again, said Roger Kemp in an interview. Friends and acquaintances who took an active part in the search for Alexandra Kemp's assailant have become a close-knit family who still remember and mourn her sudden and unjust demise. Tireless, passionate, and kind, Roger Kemp passed away at the age of 77. He truly was a national treasure, said Jill Leaker, his friend and colleague. Roger Kemp's ingenuity helped hundreds of people find justice. Inspired by Kemp's idea, many other police departments across the country have adopted similar billboard strategies. To date, these billboards have helped authorities in Kansas alone capture more than 30 fugitives. Once, on a popular TV show, Roger Kemp said, "You have two choices. You can stay in bed and pull the covers over your head, or you can get out and fight the battle. I chose to fight. I would never let this guy win." And he kept his word. By his efforts, he protected the community from a brutal criminal who surely would have repeated his actions. Honor and praise to such a devoted, loving father and truly strong individual. Martin Gardner sat on the porch of his desolate home, clutching a photo album he had received years after the tragic day. That album had become a symbol of his loss, a living testament to a terrible tragedy. Martin's gaze stopped at the pictures of his small and innocent children, Talen, Sai, Savi, and Yazi. These pictures were all he had left of his happy days. As he looked into their faces, he could almost hear their children's voices filling this house with laughter and warmth once upon a time. Martin's first child was Talen, who was only 4 years old. To his father, he was the light of his life. The man dreamed of spending all his free time with him, teaching him everything he knew, and drinking beer with him in the future, when Talen would be a real grown man and Martin himself would be gray and important. Little Saya, who was only 3 years old, always ran to her father when he came home from work, remembering to take her cloth doll with her. She always asked Martin to give her and her doll a kiss before she went to bed. This always brought a smile to her father's face, and he performed this sweet ritual with seriousness and respect. Savi, a 2-year-old girl, was silent and intelligent. She loved to flip through books and watch animal movies. Martin often took her on his lap and read her favorite stories to her. He saw in her the potential of a future intelligent and serious woman who would achieve great heights in life. And Yazi was the youngest, still a very tiny baby with deep black eyes. When Martin looked into her eyes, he saw a vast world there. Those eyes were exactly like those of her mother, Shenia Gardner. Martin remembered how happy he was that she had given him this beautiful world full of love, comfort, and children's laughter. But that world was shattered one fateful day. Shenia Gardner was born in the late 80s in Memphis, the American state of Tennessee. Little is known about her early years, other than the fact that she was the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass, who once inhabited the cozy cabins of Madison, Alabama. Shenia's childhood and youth flowed as routinely as any other girl's. At that time, she was a young brunette with curly hair, slender and beautiful. The girl was always surrounded by loyal friends and displayed bright talents. Shenia was filled with a true creative spirit. She had a unique gift of composing songs. Music was her passion, and singing was her way of expressing herself. Her vocal abilities caught the attention of the locals, and she became a local celebrity. However, singing was only one of her many hobbies. Shenia was fascinated by the world of fashion and photography. She looked great in front of the camera and could turn everyday moments into works of art. Despite all these colorful hobbies, inside Shenia was a woman full of charity who always found time for religion. She often attended church and carefully cared for her family. Everything in Shenia's life seemed set and promised a bright future. Shenia was only 14 years old when she met Betrayal Clayton. It started with a casual introduction through mutual friends. They immediately found common ground and became friends. By the time they grew up and graduated from high school, their relationship became more serious, and the young people officially became a couple. Shenia and Betrayal spent a lot of time together. Everyone considered them serious and stable young people. However, there were some questionable episodes in their record. Both were seen in minor offenses, such as traffic violations or disorderly conduct on the streets. In 2008, things got more serious. Betrayal was accused of assaulting a woman, and although it was done unintentionally, he was facing serious punishment. The guy got lucky, and soon all charges against him were dropped. Shenia and Betrayal did not formalize their relationship, but they lived together. In the same year 2008, the couple had a son, who was named Dallin. Shenia became a caring mother, not only to him, but also to Betrayal's 2 children from his previous relationship. Sonia Clayton, Betrayal's mother, always saw Shenia not just as a woman in love with her son, but as part of her family. Shenia was noted for her devotion and care for her children, which made her special in Sonia's eyes. However, the lovers' relationship was not a long one, and little is known about what exactly happened between them. However, even after the breakup, they continued to maintain some distant communication. To Betrayal, Shenia remained a good wife and a caring mother. When Dallin was just 2 years old, Shenia was involved in a small incident. It was a minor infraction, perhaps a parking ticket or a minor argument of no great importance. It was also insignificant compared to what the future held for her. Marrying Martin Gardner was a new phase in Shenia's life. Fate had led her to this man who appeared to bring joy and stability to her life. Shenia, on the other hand, won Martin over with her kindness and love for children. In her eyes, he saw an ocean of feminine tenderness and wisdom. Their story developed rapidly. In September 2013, they decided to start their life together and moved into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. The wedding was just the beginning of a new phase of their life together. Shortly after the celebration, they had their first child, baby Talon. And in 2014, little Saya was born into the world. Soon, 2 more girls, Savi and Yazi, came along, making their big family even happier and busier. In total, Martin and Shenia had 4 children together, as well as 1 child from the young woman's previous relationship. For the young mom, children always came first, and she enjoyed working part-time at the children's hospital. Moreover, she was actively involved in a center that raised funds to help children. It was her calling, and she gratefully dedicated her life to helping those in need on the cusp of a terrible event. Friday, July 1st, 2016. An ordinary day that didn't portend anything out of the ordinary. Around noon, Shenia was on the phone with her husband, Martin. Her voice was calm, as it usually is. She told her husband that she was going to watch a movie with the kids. There was nothing to indicate that something terrible was going to happen on this ordinary day. And then, at that moment when the spouses were having a quiet conversation, an incomprehensible madness began to happen. Suddenly, Shenia changed. She took a kitchen knife and went into the living room. There, she attacked her own 6-month-old daughter, Yazi. The defenseless little girl who couldn't fight back was caught in a terrible trap. Her life was cut short in an instant at the hands of her most loved and closest person. Dallin, the oldest of the children, he was only 7 years old, witnessed this nightmarish scene. A terrible tragedy played out before his eyes, for which he was too young to understand. The boy thought only one thing: he must do something to save his younger brother and sisters. Panicked and desperate, he ran out of the house. Shenia didn't stop there. The young woman followed her son out of the house, armed with a knife, ready to continue her nightmarish plan. She rushed after Dallin, but the man, terrified and desperate, screamed so loudly that he attracted the attention of the neighbors. A couple of neighbors heard his screams and quickly went outside to see what was going on. They found themselves witnessing a nightmare that did not settle in their nines. Realizing that Dallin was being watched, Shenia went no further. However, the whole horror was not over yet. Shenia returned to the house where Savi and Talon were waiting for her. Distraught, she went up to the bedroom where the little ones were. It was the last moments of their innocent lives. Meanwhile, those who witnessed the nightmare didn't waste a second. They quickly called emergency services, asking for help and rescue for little Dallin and his younger siblings. At that moment, none of them could have imagined the tragic consequences that awaited this peaceful street. Sheriff's personnel arrived on the scene and were confronted with an eerie scene. Inside the home at 7449 Southern Hill Drive, they found a bloodied Shenia and her 4 children lying motionless, bereft of life. The sight left everyone in shock. Shenia sat with her cell phone in her hands. She slowly dialed the number of Martin, her husband. Her voice sounded quiet and cold as she confessed to killing her children. The tragedy that had unfolded in their lives was the horrific event that would forever be remembered in this quiet neighborhood. By the time the prosecutor's office and special unit arrived on the scene, it was all over. There was only an eerie silence in the house that had once been the place of the happy Gardner family. Blood and horror lurked in every corner. The investigators had a bloody knife in their possession, silently bearing witness to the gruesome incident. Chaplains arrived to help and were shocked by what had happened, as well as specialists ready to assist Dallin. The horror he had endured required immediate intervention. While the necessary information was gathered and investigations were underway, law enforcement asked residents to stay inside their homes and not go outside. Some did not need this request. They still felt fear and uncertainty. Their home seemed to be the only safe place. A major operation forced sheriff's officials to close off access to the apartment complex, including the golf area and country club. As for Shenia, she was apprehended and taken into custody without bail. Her trial was immediately scheduled for July 5th. Society could not remain indifferent to these horrific events unfolding in the life of Shenia Gardner. No matter how monstrous she was portrayed, she was a mother and a partner who radiated love, care, and joy, according to Michelle Jamont, her co-worker. Michelle vigorously defended Shenia on social media, speaking out about the unfairness of the allegations. She also brought up an important aspect: postpartum depression. Cases like this have sparked discussion, and Dr. Joel Reisman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that the killing of children by their own mother is rare and usually accompanied by mental illness. He also pointed out the lack of mental health funding in the state, which leaves many families without the support they need. Dr. Diane Barnes, a psychology and postpartum health specialist, explained the difference between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, emphasizing that they are completely different conditions with different symptoms. And while Shenia's exact condition required further investigation, Dr. Barnes doubted that women in a state of postpartum depression would commit such acts. She leaned toward the idea of psychosis. The investigation in Shenia Gardner's case was arduous. Her defense attorney, Craig Morton, became her defense attorney, but he chose not to comment on the case to the media in the early stages, believing it was too early for such discussions. On July 5, 2016, at the court hearing, Shenia remained silent, appearing only via video link. Judge Lois Lambert asked her questions, but the young woman did not utter a single word. After the trial, Shenia was sent to the Mental Health Institute. Shenia's next of kin came to the courthouse, but declined to comment to reporters. Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols planned to file a motion to preserve evidence in the case, including information gathered from social media. January 2017 brought formal charges against Shenia on 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a deadly weapon, aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The mysterious and gruesome investigation continued, and the community was left waiting for justice and answers to many questions. The hearing included testimony from Shenia's loved ones. On that fateful day, Sonia, Betrayal's mother, was undoubtedly shocked to learn of the terrible tragedy. She immediately arrived on the scene in a desperate search for her grandson Dowan. Sonia maintained that what had happened had nothing to do with the young woman she had once known. She expressed her belief that something supernatural, perhaps of a diabolical nature, was behind it all. As time passed, however, and the initial shock began to wear off, Sonia began to speculate about possible motives. She speculated that perhaps the young couple was in the process of divorce. For fear of being alone, caring for 5 children, Shenia might have come to the terrible decision to end it all. But despite these reflections, Sonia found it hard to believe. To her, the Shenia she had once known was far from a person capable of such a horrible act. Betrayal, Dowan's father, also refused to believe in Shenia's guilt. He admitted that although he was never his son's guardian, he was always able to visit him after his relationship with Shenia ended. But November 2014 was the last time he saw his son. He noticed that each time Shenia became more and more radical in her actions and decisions. Every attempt he made to contact his son failed, and he was simply not allowed to be involved in his life. But in fact, Shenia's friends and family had long ago noticed that a completely unexpected upheaval had taken place with her. The young woman began to experience a strange discomfort, but gradually developed into deep anxiety, paranoia, and even worse, panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, and many people began to suspect that it might be related to postpartum depression. This came as a real shock to those around her, as Shenia seemed to be a strong and dependable woman. She had always been the one in control, but now she seemed to have lost her footing. Her sudden change in behavior made many people wonder why this tragic situation happened. The first signs of strange behavior began in March 2015, and none of her friends and family could figure out what was going on. One day, Shenia left work early and picked up her children. With 5 children in the family car, she headed down an unknown road leading away from their home. At the time, her husband Martin assumed that his wife had gone for a walk and to unwind in some park. This was quite typical of her daily routine. However, as the hours passed, she never returned home. Very disturbed, Martin decided to put out an APB for his wife. At the wheel, with 5 children in the cabin, Shenia headed east and traveled more than 74 miles separating Memphis from Corinth, but she didn't know anyone here, and she had no apparent reason to go there in particular. She was later found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, but police never revealed how or why she ended up there. Shallow cuts were found on her neck and one of her wrists. If she was trying to take her own life, her only witnesses were her children, but they were too young to realize what was happening. Shenia was eventually returned home by authorities, but after that, even more bizarre behavior began. She told Martin that someone was threatening her and their family. Her husband was shocked, as Shenia provided no details about who it might be or why. and there were no prior instances of such threats. Also, when Shenia was with family and friends, she started complaining about her work and workload. She claimed that she felt very bad about it. Soon, she began to claim that some of her co-workers wanted to harm her. Despite these abnormalities, Shenia showed no signs of abuse or violence toward her children or others. The long wait for trial was not an easy one, and it was severely delayed due to the numerous psychiatric evaluations the defendant had to undergo. Added to this came the COVID pandemic, which only added to the length of the trial, longer than anyone expected. In 2021, the non-jury trial finally began. The defense focused its strategy on Shenia's mental illness argument. The prosecutors acknowledged her said mental illness, but they insisted that the defendant was still capable of understanding the difference between right and wrong and was aware of the illegality of her actions. Finally, a Shelby County Criminal Court judge, James, rejected the defense, and in December 2021, Shenia Gardner was found guilty of all charges against her.
In February 2022, Shenia, 34, appeared in court for sentencing, with her husband Martin also in attendance. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each count of murder, as well as 15 years for each additional count of child abuse and neglect. Shenia will only be able to apply for the possibility of parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. Given the 5 years she spent in prison prior to sentencing, Shenia will be eligible for parole in approximately 46 years, when she will be 80 years old. After sentencing, the prosecutor stated that he agreed with the decision because it was consistent with their desire to achieve justice for Martin and his children. In turn, Martin expressed some relief upon learning that Shenia would never be able to harm any children again. Sonia, Dallin's grandmother, stood among people, including neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers, during an evening vigil at the apartment complex where the family lived. In remembrance of the innocent victims, those who came to say goodbye held red and white candles and prayed several times for the souls of the departed. The Reverend Pastor of the Baptist Church noted that the vigil was the beginning of a healing process for the entire community, because in the end, the only thing in the hands of those present was a desire to support the surviving baby and his father and help them through this difficult moment. Betrayal did not attend the memorial ceremony. On his behalf, Sonia told the media that he was too overwhelmed with anger to show up for the ceremony. The president and CEO of the children's hospital where Shenia worked also expressed their condolences on behalf of everyone at the hospital. Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him with funeral arrangements for his 4 children. During the ceremony, while saying a few words about his children and family, Martin showed incredible fortitude and nobility in his words. In his final speech, he emphasized that his home was happy when his children and Shenia were there, and that this is how it will remain in his memory forever. The case of Austin Harif, a handsome, honor student, athlete, and cannibal. Can a young, physically healthy, and strong man suddenly lose his mind, turning into a wild beast? And if such a transformation does occur, where should one search for the root cause of this drastic change? Experts believe that such mental disorders are often hereditary, can be the result of traumatic experiences, substance abuse, or social isolation. Austin Harif's case stands out. It's not just a sudden bout of madness, a wild frenzy, or a personality disorder. Medical professionals have classified his condition as clinical delirium of lycanthropy, and the press has dubbed him a cannibal. It's believed that the young man suffers from a rare psychiatric syndrome where the patient believes they are transforming into an animal. However, the families of the victims, both injured and deceased from his transformations, are convinced that Harif feigned insanity to avoid accountability. Harif himself did not hide the fact that he had been consuming various narcotics and psychotropic drugs for a long time, but examinations showed he was clean at the time of committing the heinous acts. Now let's delve into this complex case from the beginning and trace how the scion of a wealthy and respected family, an honor student, and an athlete turned into a drug-dependent madman with an uncontrollable desire to taste human flesh. The golden boy Austin Malcolm Harif was born on December 21st, 1996, in the picturesque resort town of Palm Beach, Florida,
and was the eldest of 2 children in a wealthy and respected family of doctors. His father was a renowned dentist with a network of private dental clinics, while his mother was a leading pharmaceutical specialist. The Harroffs lived in a large, luxurious home by the ocean. A year and a half after Austin's birth, the family welcomed a younger child, a daughter named Haley. From a young age, the siblings were very close, calling each other best friends. Despite their privileged upbringing, it didn't mean the children were spoiled. Their parents ensured they received a quality education and supported their holistic development and creative potential. Austin was a straight-A student in school, passionate about playing the guitar, seriously engaged in wrestling and football, and performed in an amateur theater group. He considered himself creative and ambitious. Along with his parents and sister, Austin traveled the world, spending his vacations in new places each time. In an essay written during his high school years, Austin described himself as a happy and optimistic person, with a vivid imagination capable of conjuring anything he pleased. He also mentioned his perseverance in striving for excellence in academics and sports. However, he acknowledged his shyness as a weakness, which sometimes made it difficult for him to interact with peers. When Austin turned 13, his parents decided to separate. His father left the family home to his ex-wife and moved into an equally luxurious residence with his new love interest, who soon became his wife. The children stayed with their mother, but their father remained actively involved in their upbringing and provided financial support. Soon, his mother also found a new partner, marrying him within a year, and he moved into their home. The teenage boy struggled with his parents' divorce, but it's worth noting that his emotional turmoil did not affect his academic performance or athletic achievements. Dreaming of a career in medicine to follow in his parents' footsteps, Austin aspired to help and save lives, aiming to gain admission to a prestigious college specializing in medical studies. An honor student and social outcast. In high school, Austin transformed into a true heartthrob. He grew tall, reaching 6 feet 2 inches, boasted a muscular build, and was quite strong. His charming smile and innocent open gaze gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, Harroff remained the same shy guy, which hindered his ability to socialize with peers and form romantic relationships with girls. In his personal diary, which he kept during his teenage years, he wrote about having almost no friends in school, as all his classmates labeled him a nerd and mocked him. The young man also expressed hope that everything would change for the better when he went to college, changed his social circle, and moved out of his parents' house. A few months before finishing high school, Austin discovered he had been admitted to the prestigious University of Florida's 4-year medical program. Successful completion of this program would open wide career prospects for him in the future, as well as the opportunity to continue his education at any medical school in the United States. The student was incredibly happy, as his dream had come true. Towards the end of August, his parents drove him to the college campus, where he was to begin his studies. Opening up in a vlog, Austin embarked on the independent adult life he had eagerly awaited, yet little changed for him. Due to his shyness, he still struggled to connect with peers. He briefly dated a lovely girl, but they soon parted ways because, as she put it, something about his behavior alarmed her, leading her to end the relationship. In his freshman year, Harroff took a serious interest in bodybuilding, spending a lot of time in the gym and achieving impressive results. The young man developed steel muscles that looked very impressive. However, his success was not solely the result of perseverance and hard work. Steroids, which he began using regularly, also played a role. He openly shared this in his vlog on YouTube, which he started in the spring of 2016. Austin posted various videos on his channel. Some discussed sports and bodybuilding in particular. Others featured him singing with a guitar, doing cover versions of popular hits, or mimicking famous artists by copying their performance style. Still, others were about himself and his philosophical musings on life. Over time, however, his postings became increasingly alarming. The young man started urging his followers never to use steroids, claiming they could drive a person insane. He also said he had a crazy and normal side, and was confused by them. Austin began recording videos speaking in different accents, as if they were different people, sometimes changing the tone of his voice, or he could burst into tears mid-recording for no apparent reason. His mood and facial expressions also underwent strange transformations, at times appearing as if he was just making faces at the camera.
Later, experts who reviewed his postings concluded that in each one, the young man was virtually pleading for help. For him, this blog became the only outlet and a way to express his feelings, as he failed to make any real friends during his studies. Moreover, these video recordings traced how the student gradually lost his sanity, with his behavior becoming more sensational, provocative, and even aggressive. Austin's subscribers suspected he was using some controlled substances and recorded his videos under their influence. They directly asked him about this in the comments, but he replied that it's unhealthy, and as an athlete, he would never use drugs. However, his behavior suggested otherwise, and one of the subscribers even speculated that Harif might have a dissociative identity disorder. What's wrong with Austin? When Austin returned home for the summer break, his mother and sister, who hadn't seen him in almost a year and hadn't watched his blog online, were literally shocked by the changes in him during that time. Austin had undergone a significant physical transformation, turning into a veritable mountain of muscle, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. He became odd in every sense, speaking nonsense and claiming he no longer needed sleep. Initially, his family didn't take his words seriously until the night came. Austin declared he would patrol the house, guarding his family's peace from some dark forces. And he indeed kept his promise, wandering around the house until morning. Moreover, every hour, he would check on his mother and sister's rooms, loudly assuring them they could sleep peacefully because he was on duty. The next morning, his mother decided to have a frank conversation with her son and directly asked him if he was using any drugs. Austin candidly admitted that he had tried virtually all drugs over the past year and even described how each one affected him. Among other things, he had taken a potent synthetic drug that caused severe hallucinations, fits of rage, and could lead to a fatal overdose. Nevertheless, he swore to his mother that it was all in the past, and he no longer touched the poison that drove him insane. After hearing her son out, Mrs. Harif made what was perhaps the main mistake. She did not seek help from qualified professionals, deciding she could help her son cope on her own. Being an experienced pharmacist, she took matters into her own hands. She gave her son a sedative and a sleeping pill, thinking it would help him relax and fall asleep after a sleepless night. However, Austin, after dozing off for just a couple of hours, was back on his post by night. He resumed patrolling the house until morning, informing its inhabitants every hour that all was quiet, and there was no need to worry. This went on for several weeks, but the mother still refused to involve psychiatrists or even inform her ex-husband about the situation. Early on the morning of August 13th, Austin knocked on the door of a former classmate living a few blocks from him. The girl was quite surprised since they hadn't seen each other in over a year, and he hadn't warned her of his visit. When she asked the reason for his appearance, Austin said he had forgotten what year he was born and urgently needed this information. The puzzled classmate answered that it was in 1996, after which the young man abruptly turned around and left without a word. Austin's stunt scared and puzzled the girl, so she immediately called Mrs. Harif and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using prohibited substances. Only then did the woman decide to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and shared her concerns that something was seriously wrong with their son. The boy's father flew to Florida the next day and, after talking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for an examination, to which the young man categorically refused. Then the man had a heart-to-heart conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send their son for compulsory examination and subsequent treatment in a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they were unable to do so in time. A disturbing confession. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach, given the hot and sunny weather. His mother insisted that Haley go along to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing, but dressed unusually warm for the beach, as if heading to the mountains instead. He wore a thick athletic hoodie with long sleeves, matching pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him dressed like that, they were initially silent, then burst into laughter a few seconds later. They teased Austin, asking why he was dressed that way and if everything was okay with him. Austin became seriously angry, shouting that if they thought he was crazy, then he would act accordingly and end one of their lives. The boys didn't take his words seriously, but backed off just to be safe. Haley noticed her brother was on the verge of a breakdown, so she decided to talk to him and calm him down. During their conversation, unheard by the others, Austin told his sister that he wasn't entirely human, but half wild animal, immortal, and possessed superhuman strength. His words frightened her, but she tried to remain calm to avoid provoking aggression from her brother. At the beach, Austin acted completely normal and natural. He joked, laughed, played volleyball with friends, and goofed around. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes, and everyone went their separate ways. Austin and Haley headed towards a small restaurant near the coast where they planned to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he intended to test his immortality, then headed towards a busy highway, planning to cross it inappropriately, directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she ran after her brother and physically dragged him away, begging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't make anyone wait, and silently followed his sister. At dinner, Austin behaved oddly again, silently getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he feared someone, then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin jumped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, shoved his father hard, and ran out of the restaurant. Attack on an elderly couple and their neighbor. What unfolded after the young man left the restaurant could be straight out of a horror movie. He later claimed to have no memory of the events and couldn't believe he was capable of such brutality. Austin walked several miles until he wandered into an unfamiliar neighborhood. There, the bright light from an open garage drew his attention, and he made his way towards it. In that home lived an elderly couple, 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishcon Stevens. In the evenings, they enjoyed barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage. Set up like a living room, they had been married for over a quarter of a century, had 3 adult children living on their own, and were now enjoying their retirement and each other's company. That evening, John went for a walk with their dog while his wife prepared everything for their usual movie night. When Michelle saw an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no threat and even asked if he needed help. But the situation took an unexpected turn. The couple's neighbor, Jeffrey Fisher, lived across the street and was on friendly terms with the Stevens. Around 9 in the evening, he heard suspicious noises outside. Looking into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw a tall, large young man attacking the elderly woman by the open garage. Jeffrey tried to pull the stranger away, but the young man was overpoweringly strong, knocking Jeffrey to the ground. As he tried to recover, the assailant stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens house to draw the attacker's attention away from himself, and after exiting through the back door, headed to his own home. Only once inside did he realize the assailant had not followed him, but returned to the unfortunate Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife and that he had been injured along with his elderly neighbor. After speaking with emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening intently. Soon, he was convinced no one was outside his door, and the attacker had stayed at the neighbor's home.
Moreover, the assailant was now making strange, animal-like sounds, similar to the growling of a wild beast, accompanied by screams of terror and moans. Fatal assault and gruesome act. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive at the scene, but by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that greeted them was horrifying and beyond any logical explanation. 2 officers approached the garage, weapons drawn, only to freeze in disbelief at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of the homeowner, Michelle Mishkan Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further in the dim light, 2 more individuals were on the ground, but it took a moment for the officers to process the scene. One man reached out, pleading for help in a strained voice. Above him was another man, seemingly choking him, gripping his neck with one hand and tilting his head back with the other. The officers demanded the attacker release the victim, threatening with their guns. But he showed no reaction. Firing was too risky due to the chance of hitting both individuals. Instead, one officer pulled out a taser, warned he was about to use it, and moved closer. Only then did he see the assailant was not just attacking, but actually biting the man's face, holding his head and neck firmly. The victim, as you might have guessed, was John Stevens. Beneath him spread a vast pool of blood. His left cheek was missing a chunk of flesh, and his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. The elderly man was immobilized, barely able to move, silently begging for help. The officer shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at the victim's face with his teeth. A kick to the assailant's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Subsequent kicks did little to deter him. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog, which was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto the assailant's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented the attacker long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, the young man claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Mrs. Stevens could not be revived, and her husband succumbed to his injuries en route to the hospital due to extensive blood loss from stab wounds and the shock of having his flesh consumed. The injured neighbor who reported the incident survived, but suffered permanent minor motor skill damage to his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. As for the attacker, he slipped into a coma after ingesting a substance from a bottle in the garage he mistook for alcohol, which turned out to be weed perpetrator. He suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach, spent several days on the brink of life and death, but was ultimately saved by medical professionals. Fragmented memories. Austin spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma before he finally regained consciousness and was able to give his account, claiming he remembered nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall the dinner at the restaurant and the argument with his father, after which he walked away. He then described seeing a ghost-like figure that led him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until a light appeared in the distance. The source of the light turned out to be a lantern near the Stevens garage, where the homeowner was preparing a barbecue and taking out food. When his presence startled the woman, she called for help. Austin admitted to striking her several times and then, drawing a knife, declared he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a man, neighbor Jeffrey Fisher, attacked him, whom Austin perceived as a demon, and he retaliated with the knife. After Fisher ran to seek help, Haroff continued to assault the woman until she showed no signs of life. He then noticed a bottle, mistook its contents for alcohol, and drank about half. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. The homeowner had returned, shocked by the scene. Austin claimed no memory of what happened next, at least according to his own statements. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of potent narcotics, which might explain his aggression and insensitivity to pain. However, when he was tested at the hospital, his blood showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol. This led to the conclusion that Austin might have had a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Determining the truth of this claim was left to experienced psychiatrists. Between the courtroom and psychiatric care, the case of Austin Harroff gained widespread media attention due to its unprecedented brutality and ambiguity. The children of the deceased couple, as well as the relatives of the injured neighbor, were convinced that the young man was feigning insanity and memory lapses in order to be declared incompetent and avoid severe punishment. This sentiment was shared by the majority of those following the case. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, noted in his report that Mr. Harroff's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode resulting in the death of 2 people. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of committing the crime. There were suggestions that the young man's mental health had deteriorated due to his experiments with various narcotics, steroid use, and difficulties in socializing with peers, which he had experienced since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was clean, with no traces of illegal substances or alcohol found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his aggressive behavior lay elsewhere. During one of the court hearings, Austin's father revealed that there was at least one confirmed case of schizophrenia in their family, and he feared that this severe illness had been passed on to his son. It's worth noting that the student was suspected of having a rather rare disorder known as clinical lycanthropy delusion. Such a diagnosis could explain why the young man behaved like a wild beast and was impervious to pain, but none of the psychiatrists examining the defendant confirmed it. After treatment, Austin was transferred to jail, but the case remains unresolved to this day. The young man is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers insist that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of the deceased couple and the injured man have expressed hope in the interviews that Harroff will be found competent and sentenced to death for his heinous acts. The Kaler family case. Can this crime be justified by a nervous disorder? In 1995, Kansas passed a law stating that an offender who committed a premeditated crime could not blame his actions on a mental disorder that made him unable to distinguish right from wrong. This law was passed because almost every criminal, when brought to trial, tried to avoid punishment by claiming that he was not in control of his actions or did not realize the consequences because of a mental disorder. The head of the once happy and large Kaler family tried to use insanity as a defense to avoid responsibility for the atrocities he committed. However, he was found sane. Psychologists believe that his actions were motivated by jealousy, rage, and a desire for revenge against the ex-wife who left him and the daughters who supported their mother. Unfortunately, such crimes motivated by jealousy and a pathological desire for revenge are a common worldwide phenomenon. According to statistics, these motives account for 1 in 8 crimes committed. Excessive suspicion, insecurity, and obsessive need to control a partner can turn a person into a real beast who does not spare even his own children. The story of the Kaler family. James Craig Kaler was born in 1963 in Weatherford, Texas. His future wife, Karen Kaler, née White, was born in the same city in 1965. They met in the early 1980s as students at a Texas university. Craig was graduating in engineering, and Karen was a freshman in the humanities department. They quickly found common ground and soon began a romantic relationship. They were young, in love, and seemed like the perfect couple. Craig was a top student known for his determination and talent in engineering. In the late 1980s, after graduation, they had a modest wedding attended only by close friends and family. Their first child, Emily, was born in 1991, followed by Lauren in 1993. They lived in a cozy house in Weatherford and were quite well off by local standards. In 1999, when Karen was pregnant with her third child, Craig received a lucrative job offer at a large utility company in Weatherford. His promotion coincided with the birth of their son, Sean, whom he adored. With a higher income, Craig bought a spacious house in the city's most prestigious neighborhood and a reliable family car. Karen stayed at home, and Craig became the primary breadwinner. Outwardly, the family seemed perfect. The daughters, Emily and Lauren, were talented in sports and music, often participating in vocal competitions and local events. Emily excelled in school and went to a prestigious pharmacy college, while Lauren, an excellent student, dreamed of attending a conservatory to pursue a career in music. Sean was an outgoing, kind, and inquisitive boy, interested in numismatics and aspiring to become an archaeologist. He was very close to his parents and sisters. Craig provided for his family. Karen made the home comfortable, raised the children, and baked tasty treats. They were active in the community, striving to improve their neighborhood. They also raised 3 wonderful and talented children. However, behind the facade of perfection, there were many problems that family members kept hidden. In 2007, Karen admitted to her younger sister Linda that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She complained that Craig had been controlling and monitoring her for years, and that this control was increasing. Craig demanded a full accounting of all expenditures, not just major purchases, but everyday household expenses as well. Karen provided him with supermarket receipts, bank transaction data, and reported her whereabouts every day while he was at work. The entire Kaler family lived on a strict schedule set by Craig. When he returned from work, his wife and children had to be home to meet him. They went to bed, woke up, and ate at certain times, and even intimacy between the couple was scheduled. Over time, Craig's obsession with control intensified. He became increasingly demanding and selfish, and Karen's actions were scheduled down to the hour. Karen felt enslaved. She had no free time, only duties and responsibilities. She tried to fulfill all of her husband's demands, hoping that he would loosen his control and they could get back to their old life, but Craig seemed to enjoy his control and was unwilling to change. Linda was deeply disturbed by her sister's revelations. She, like everyone else, had seen Craig as the perfect husband, father, and family man, and it turned out he was a domestic tyrant. However, Karen did not want to destroy her family. Besides, she and her children were financially dependent on Craig. Therefore, she decided to find a job that would provide her with a stable income. Karen's new hobby. Karen, despite her advanced age and 3 children, was in great physical shape. She always adhered to the principles of good nutrition, periodically followed diets, took care of herself, and went jogging every day. Secretly from her husband, she enrolled in a local fitness club where she started working out for several hours every day. It was her way of blowing off steam, distracting herself and getting her thoughts in order. She attended the gym while Craig was at work and didn't notice her working out. Soon the management of the sports club noticed the attractive, fit, and diligent woman. Karen was offered to try herself as a fitness instructor with a probationary period and the possibility of an official labor contract. The former housewife could not have dreamed of such an opportunity because now she will be able to continue doing what she loves and even receive a decent remuneration for it. Eventually, Craig found out that his wife was going to the gym. Karen expected a scandal and that her husband would forbid her to go, but surprisingly, he reacted calmly. He even seemed pleased that his wife had found something to do and was now earning her own money. His only conditions were that she had to be home when he arrived, cook meals, and not disrupt their planned intimate life. Karen found these conditions acceptable because now she had the freedom of action and the ability to provide for her own needs without having to justify to her husband every dime she spent. Unexpected romance and a love triangle. Soon there was a new instructor at the fitness club named Sonny Rice. Karen and Sonny quickly hit it off and became friends. For Karen, who had been a stay-at-home mom for many years and was unable to socialize with people outside the family, Sonny became a trusted confidant. The women spent time together at work every day, sometimes going for walks, drinking coffee, and having heart-to-heart talks. It didn't take long for their friendship to grow into something more. Naturally, they hid their feelings and relationship from everyone, but in time, Karen decided that she had to confess everything to her husband. She spent months preparing for this conversation, trying to find the right words, not knowing how to start and what the consequences might be. Eventually, she opened up to Craig. Although Craig was quite puzzled by his wife's revelation, He reacted rather calmly and did not make a scene. However, the next day, Craig stated that he agreed to his wife's relationship with Sonny, but on the condition that he could join them. Karen was shocked by her husband's proposal and didn't know how to react to it. Nevertheless, Craig took the initiative and began courting Sonny, sending her flowers and small gifts. He seemed to see this as an opportunity to brighten his intimate life and add passion and new sensations to his marriage to Karen. At first, the women agreed to his proposal, but soon realized that for Craig it was a game of dominance. Their peculiar love triangle didn't last long, and Craig was made to realize that he was not welcome in their relationship. Feeling insulted, Craig demanded that Karen end the affair immediately, but she continued to date Sonny, genuinely in love. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, it seemed that Karen was ready to leave her husband for a new relationship.
A move to another state and secret meetings. After months of scandals, confrontations, and agonizing deliberation, Craig decided that the best solution to save his family would be to move to another state. He began looking for a new job, sending out resumes, and soon landed a position as a water director for a large company in Columbia, Missouri, a city neighboring Kansas. Craig believed that his wife's move to another state would end her affair with Sonny and their family life would return to normal. The move in the summer of 2008 proved difficult for the family, as the children had to change schools, make new friends, and adjust to life in a new city. Although the family was already well off, Craig's salary in his new position was nearly double what he earned in Weatherford. However, with more responsibilities and more hours on the job, Craig naively thought he had cut Sonny out of his wife's life for good. But he was wrong. Karen and Sonny continued to communicate regularly, exchanging calls and texts and meeting in secret. They would drive to meet halfway and spend a couple hours in a roadside hotel before returning home. By then, Karen knew her marriage was doomed. She no longer loved her husband, and divorce was only a matter of time. These secret trysts continued until December 2008. On that New Year's Eve, the Kaler family returned to their hometown to visit family and friends. Sonny was also present at this party. Karen and Sonny behaved low-key at first, simply exchanging greetings. However, as the party progressed and under the influence of alcohol, they seemed to forget about social norms. The lovers were inseparable, holding hands, exchanging longing glances, and some guests even caught them kissing. Craig wasn't just angry, he was furious. Karen had insulted and humiliated him in front of dozens of former roommates, friends, and co-workers, making her affair public. Craig made a scene at the party, verbally attacking his wife and Sonny. An enraged Craig forcibly dragged Karen away from the party. On the way home, he lost control of himself. He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her with such force that her dress ripped. He then slapped her, causing her to stumble and fall, hitting her head hard. Divorce and painful harassment. After returning home, the conflict did not subside, and a few days later, Karen told Craig that she was leaving him. She initiated divorce proceedings and demanded custody of the children. At first, Craig tried to apologize, begging to keep the family for the sake of the children and offering to give their marriage another chance. However, Karen was adamant and obtained a divorce. Craig then began calling their mutual friends and relatives, asking them to talk to Karen and convince her not to break up the family and stay with him. Despite his best efforts, she firmly told him that she was leaving for Sonny and was never truly happy in their marriage. In the early spring of 2009, while they were still living under the same roof, another argument broke out, and Craig resorted to physical violence for the first time since that New Year's Eve party. Karen reported him to the police and he was arrested. However, at the station, he claimed that his wife was hysterical and he only held her tightly to calm her down, which caused the bruises on her arms. After this incident, Karen, without waiting for an official divorce, took the children and moved out. For Craig, it was a serious blow, but even more he was angry when he learned that his daughters sided with their mother, saying that for the first time in a long time saw her happy. He saw this as a betrayal and refused to communicate with Emily and Lauren, only calling Sean and taking him with him on weekends, while blatantly ignoring his daughters.
Meanwhile, despite the ongoing divorce proceedings, Craig still hoped that his wife would change her mind and come back to him. He was jealous, tried to control her, and followed her everywhere. He watched her house, followed her around town in a rental car trying to remain undetected, and even tried to set up a hidden camera in her house when no one was there. Naturally, all of this took time and effort, so Craig had to sacrifice work. First he took a vacation, then he claimed that he was sick, and in the end he just started skipping work without explanation. This reckless behavior led to his termination. After losing his job and source of income, Craig was forced to move into his parents' house because he couldn't afford his own. Now, with plenty of free time, he was able to stalk his ex-wife all day long, leading her to take his ex-husband to court to stop him from approaching her. Horrible Thanksgiving. In November 2009, just before Thanksgiving, Karen took her children to visit her 89-year-old grandmother, Dorothy White, in the small town of Burlingame, Kansas, to spend the vacations. On the evening of November 29th, the Burlingame Police Department received an alarm call about a suspicious van and the sound of gunshots. Dorothy's neighbors reported seeing a small truck pull up to the elderly woman's home, a man get out of it and enter the house. They then allegedly heard screams and gunshots, but are not sure. The man then left the house, got back into the truck, and drove away quickly. Neighbors did not attempt to apprehend him, fearing he was armed. When police pulled up to the house, they were met by a terrified 10-year-old boy calling for help. It was Sean Kaler, who couldn't explain what had happened, but it was clear that a terrifying scene awaited the police inside. Near the front door, they found the 89-year-old homeowner lying in a pool of blood and surprisingly alive despite 2 gunshot wounds. In the kitchen, police found the lifeless body of 44-year-old Karen. She had been shot in the chest and then killed by a close-range gunshot to the head. Her ex-husband had left her with no chance of survival. The body of her oldest daughter, 18-year-old Emily, lay between a wall and a couch. She had apparently tried to hide from her enraged father, but he caught up with her and took her life with 2 point-blank shots. Her younger sister, Lauren, lay in a pool of blood in a second-floor bedroom. She was still alive, begging faintly to save her life and repeatedly stating that her father had done it. The elderly woman and Lauren were immediately rushed to the intensive care unit of a nearby hospital. Despite the doctor's best efforts, their lives could not be saved. Lauren died on the morning of December 1st from massive blood loss and damage to her internal organs, and her great-grandmother died a few hours later that day. The only surviving witness. Sean was in a state of shock. Psychologists worked with him, but he needed a thorough interrogation as the only living witness to the tragic events at his great-grandmother's house. He said that that evening his mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and he approached her to ask for his favorite pies. Suddenly, the back door of the house swung open and their father entered the house with a shotgun in his hands. Without saying a word, the man pointed the barrel at his ex-wife and shot her, then moved closer and fired again. For the first few seconds, Sean froze in horror. Then his father turned to him, but didn't aim, just silently and intently stared at him. Sean realized he had to run, so he jumped out the open back door. The boy ran toward the main entrance, hoping to alert his grandmother and sisters and call for help. However, as he reached the threshold, he heard several more gunshots. Fearing to enter the house, he hid in a small outbuilding. He heard several more shots and waited in terror for his father to come after him. Where is Mr. Kaler? Craig was immediately put on the wanted list, warning that he was armed and extremely dangerous. Meanwhile, police received several reports of a speeding truck, which helped them quickly determine the direction the gunman was traveling. At one point, the man abandoned his vehicle in a wooded area and began walking down a deserted road. Law enforcement quickly caught up with him and apprehended him the next morning. He had left the rifle and ammunition in the back seat, with prescription medication for depression and anxiety disorders lying next to the driver's seat. Mr. Kaler did not resist arrest. He did not seem to care anymore. He looked confused and even frightened, and honestly admitted that he was armed with a gun and a hunting knife, but did not intend to use them. He also admitted that he had done something terrible that he believed the police already knew about. At first, when he was taken to the police station, Craig fully admitted his guilt and poured his heart out to the investigating officer. He told how his wife had cheated on him with Sonny, how they had humiliated him in front of his friends at a New Year's Eve party, how his attempts to save his marriage had cost him his job, and what was left of his self-respect. The man cried, said he did not know how he had decided to take such a step, and complained that everyone, including his daughters, had betrayed him. Trial and fair sentence. Craig's trial began in December 2010. The defendant, who was advised by his lawyer Thomas Heaney, recanted his initial confession, blaming his actions on mental illness and insanity. It was his only option to avoid the death penalty for the murder of 4 people. Heaney tried to convince the court that his client was in a difficult psycho-emotional state after his wife left him for a lover. His children sided with their mother. He lost his job and was forced to move back into his parents' home. All of these factors contributed to the breakdown, the lawyer said, and Mr. Kaler committed the crime while insane, not realizing what he was doing. Prior to 1995, there was indeed a law that allowed criminals to get leniency by pleading insanity. However, in Kansas, where the crime was committed and the trial took place, that law was repealed. Furthermore, the prosecution found no evidence of insanity, or affective state in Craig's actions, only cold calculation. He purchased guns and ammunition in advance, went to Dorothy White's house, knowing that his entire family was there. He shot each victim twice, leaving no chance of survival. However, he deliberately spared his son, Sean, allowing him to escape. In August 2011, the man was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. Sean, who was 12 years old at the time, testified at the final hearing. He said that he did not wish his father dead, as he was the only close relative left. Despite numerous appeals by Craig and his attorneys, the verdict remained unchanged. As of today, Mr. Kaler is still in prison and continues to fight to have the case reviewed and the death sentence overturned. As for Sean, after the death of his mother and sisters, he was officially taken into custody by his maternal grandmother. He is now an adult, has finished school, received an education, and has decided to stay and work in his home state.
The Amato family case, when obsession turns a quiet individual into a monster. Like many serious addictions, which can be likened to severe illnesses with psychological, biological, or social underpinnings, this case involves a destructive habit, whether it's an urge for alcohol, prohibited substances, or gambling, or an obsessive need for a particular activity or interaction with a certain person or group. It's tragic when addiction affects not just the individual, but also their loved ones who strive earnestly to help. The once prosperous and happy Amato family faced such a dilemma head-on. As all family members were healthcare professionals, they believed they could handle the situation without external help. By the time they realized the severity of the situation, it was regrettably too late. This isn't a story of mere addiction, but of a young man's extreme obsession with a woman he had never personally met. Compounded by his addiction to forbidden substances and a pathological inclination towards theft, the situation spiraled into a horrifying outcome. Let's delve into this case to understand if there was a chance to alter the course of events and prevent the tragedy. The family home bloodshed. On January 25, 2019, a concerned man contacted the Seminole County Police in Florida. He reported that his close friend and colleague, Cody Amato, a nurse, unexpectedly didn't show up for his shift at the hospital, which was highly unusual for him. The day before, Cody had left work about 15 minutes early due to some urgent family issues at home, departing so hastily he even forgot to collect his pay for the day. Attempts to reach the 31-year-old Cody by phone were unsuccessful. He simply wasn't answering. His girlfriend, with whom he had been living recently, stated that Cody went to his parents' house the previous day at his father's request, but never returned to her place, and she too couldn't reach him. All these signs triggered alarming thoughts, prompting the dispatch of police officers to the provided address. The Amato family home, located in a suburb of Orlando, boasted a large adjoining area,
with a stable and a horse-walking area. Cody's car was parked in the driveway, and lights were on in several rooms of the house. At first glance, everything seemed normal. No signs of forced entry or struggle, with the doors and windows intact. When the sheriff's deputy knocked, there was no response, and calls to the landline also went unanswered. The police then sought permission to enter, and upon approval, cautiously unlocked the back door using a knife to slide the bolt. Inside, an eerie silence pervaded, though the lit room suggested someone must be present. Indeed, the homeowners were there. The officers first discovered the lifeless body of 59-year-old family patriarch, Chad Amato, lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of his own blood, with 2 close-range gunshot wounds to his chest. Next, at the staircase opposite the main entrance, lay Cody, curled up and also deceased in a massive pool of blood. Lastly, they found 61-year-old Margaret Amato sitting at her computer in the home office. At first glance, she seemed to be napping with her head resting on her arm, if not for the blood splatters on the monitor and a large, spreading stain beneath her head. The murder weapon, an IY Jericho 941 pistol found next to Cody's body, was later determined by forensic experts to have his fingerprints. With no signs of break-in or external presence and nothing missing from the house, it initially appeared that Cody, possibly after a family dispute, had ended their lives and then shot himself in the chest. However, smeared blood on the front door indicated it was locked by someone leaving the house after the incident, suggesting the perpetrator wasn't among the deceased family members. Regarding the likely suspect, there were little doubts. Those familiar or connected with the Amato family pointed to their youngest son, 30-year-old Grant, who had been missing since that evening. His car, a white Honda, along with some personal items including a laptop from Grant's room, were gone, implying that the owner had taken them. Grant was declared a person of interest, and a search was initiated for his whereabouts. What's known about the Amato family? Margaret Ann Amato, née Wade, and Chad Robert Amato tied the knot in the mid-1980s. Margaret, 2 years senior to Chad, was already raising a 3-year-old son, Jason, from a previous marriage. Chad wasn't deterred by her having a child. Instead, he was ready to raise Jason as his own. In 1988, the couple welcomed their first child together, a son named Cody, followed by the birth of their youngest son, Grant Tiernan Amato, on May 20th, 1989. From childhood, the brothers shared a close bond. Raised in a well-off family, they hardly ever faced denials. However, to earn certain privileges, they had to adhere to family rules, excel in school, help with household chores, and exhibit good behavior. They strived to be the pride and support of their parents. Both parents held advanced degrees in healthcare. Margaret was a senior operational manager in a prestigious private clinic, while Chad, initially a clinical pharmacist, later shifted to software specialization. The family was quite affluent, living in a spacious suburban home with their own stable, breeding thoroughbred racehorses as a hobby. After finishing high school at 18, Jason left home, pursued university education, and started his own life. He got married, settled a family, and moved to another state, maintaining a close relationship with his parents and younger brothers. Cody and Grant were almost inseparable, attending the same school, joining the same sports team, and regularly visiting the shooting range with their father on weekends. The Amatos had an impressive firearm collection, including rare pieces, accessible only to the family patriarch for safety reasons. The youngest son, Grant, was the youngest of 3 sons in the family, and as often happens, he received the lion's share of everyone's attention and adoration. As a child, he was frail and sickly, so everyone tried to surround him with love and care. He grew up to be a modest and very shy boy, finding it hard to connect with peers, making his brothers his only friends. Grant became particularly close to Cody after their eldest brother, Jason, grew up and left home. After high school, the brothers pursued medical degrees together, eventually becoming anesthesiologists. While Cody excelled in his studies, becoming the top student in his class, Grant barely made it through with low grades. Nevertheless, both managed to land jobs in their field at a hospital. Cody earned a reputation as a reliable professional, but Grant frequently got into trouble, making errors and needing his work double-checked. In the summer of 2018, Grant's career at the hospital ended scandalously. He was caught stealing strictly controlled sedatives, which caused euphoria and hallucinations, and were used rarely for anesthesia. The discovery led to police involvement, and Grant was arrested. During interrogation, he admitted to the theft, claiming he administered the drugs to patients who, in his opinion, were under-medicated. Many believed Grant was using or selling the drugs illegally, though there was no direct evidence. He was immediately suspended and later fired. His criminal case for theft was eventually dismissed, reportedly due to his parents' intervention. Unemployed and internet-dependent. After losing his job, the 29-year-old man, already a loner, became even more withdrawn. He spent weeks indoors, glued to his computer, mostly browsing adult websites. Grant never had a girlfriend and struggled with social interactions with women, leaving him feeling inadequate. He indulged in viewing adult content and frequently interacted with webcam models on specialized platforms, trying to fill the void of a non-existent personal life. This private interaction, of course, came at a cost. Grant easily accessed funds from his parents' and older brother's accounts for these activities. This obsession quickly spiraled into an addiction, compounded by regular alcohol consumption. But Grant seemed content with this lifestyle, living off his family, spending their money without contributing anything in return. Eventually, his father issued an ultimatum: find a job soon, or he'd have to leave home and lose any financial support from the family. Grant promised his father to resolve the issue but had no real intention of seeking employment. He claimed he would become a streamer, earning by broadcasting video games. His parents, seeing this as better than nothing, agreed to set up a streaming station for him. Once everything was in place, Grant pretended to be streaming, asking for privacy, but in reality he was locked in his room, indulging in his favorite pastime, visiting adult-only websites. Trip to Japan. In August 2018, when Cody took a vacation from work, he decided to embark on a journey across the globe for a change of scenery. Dreaming of visiting Japan, he invited his younger brother Grant and his best friend Jeremy. While Cody and Jeremy had their own funds for the trip, earned independently, Grant's vacation was financed by their parents. However, rather than giving the money directly to Grant, they entrusted it to Cody, the more responsible of the two. The trip lasted nearly 2 weeks, and throughout it, Grant seemed disengaged. He showed little interest in tours or landmarks, constantly fixated on his smartphone's screen. He often stayed back at the hotel, using his brother's laptop. On a day the group went to Lake Kawaguchi near Mount Fuji, Jeremy accidentally left his credit card in their hotel room. Seizing the opportunity, Grant hacked into Jeremy's account and withdrew thousands of dollars, spending it all on private sessions with his favorite webcam model. Jeremy discovered the theft later, but initially suspected fraud. He couldn't pinpoint the culprit and continued to investigate the incident after returning home, unaware that Grant was responsible. Sylvia Venceslavova, Sylvie. Now let's delve into the most intriguing part, the identity of the mysterious webcam model who became an obsession for Grant. On a site where Grant paid for private online interactions with various women, he met the stunning Sylvia Venceslavova from Bulgaria, known as Sylvie. She captivated him with her striking looks, confidence, charisma, and passion. Sylvie made Grant feel special, loved, desired, and unique. He began to believe that her feelings for him were genuine, and they could have a real relationship. Grant was convinced they were in a relationship, and he needed to win over this fiery brunette from all her other admirers. He spent hours and thousands of dollars daily to ensure she had no time for other men. Grant also showered her with gifts like expensive lingerie and jewelry, which she would wear during their video chats. Desperate to impress Sylvie, Grant constantly fabricated stories, losing touch with reality. He claimed to live alone in a large house, own a successful business, and could afford to lavish her with money. He backed up his claims with money transfers, initially sending a couple of $1,000s, then $10,000 and even $100,000 as a birthday gift. Naturally, Grant's lavish spending didn't go unnoticed by his parents, as he was using their accounts. At first, he explained it as investments in his own online project to attract an audience. but Chad and Margaret quickly realized their son was lying. Scandal, escape, and rehab clinic. A serious family dispute erupted at home. The patriarch demanded that the youngest son immediately pack his things and leave, but his mother and Cody intervened on Grant's behalf. The family understood that Grant was suffering from severe internet addiction. However, they were baffled about how he had spent nearly $200,000 from their accounts. A thorough search in his room uncovered vials of potent substances. Grant explained he used them to keep from going insane. The parents announced they would cut off his access to their accounts and intended to send him for mandatory treatment for drug and internet addiction. In response, Grant declared he was tired of everything and ready to end his life. He then dashed out of the house, jumped into his car, and sped away at high speed in an unknown direction. Later, it was discovered that Grant went to his aunt and uncle's house, crashed through their fence, and hit the garage wall. Aware of the turmoil in the Amato family, his relatives sympathized with him and offered him a place to stay until things settled. He readily agreed, but robbed his kind-hearted relatives the next day, stealing thousands of dollars from their accounts to pay for interactions with Sylvie. When Grant's aunt informed his parents, they asked her not to call the police, promising to resolve the situation and return the stolen money. That same day, Chad personally went to their house and took Grant, who urgently needed intervention. Chad, Margaret, and Cody realized that reasoning with him was futile, and if he left home, he would likely commit theft again. They then presented Grant with a different ultimatum. Either he would go to a rehabilitation clinic for treatment of his addictions or face jail time for theft. Reluctantly, Grant agreed to enter the clinic, where he would spend 2 months away from any temptations. He was admitted to the medical institution at the end of December 2018. The grown man's little secret. While Grant was in treatment, his parents checked his computer and discovered where their son was spending thousands of dollars daily from their family accounts. They found the profile of Sylvie, the woman who had deeply affected their son, reviewed their correspondence, and found hundreds of recordings of their intimate private online interactions that Grant treasured and often revisited. The Amatos decided to inform Sylvie that her admirer, who had showered her with money and gifts, was not a businessman, but an ordinary unemployed man with drug and internet addictions. They also pointed out that the funds Grant transferred to her were stolen, potentially subjecting him to criminal charges. However, Sylvie remained indifferent, as for her, it was just a job, and she had no intention of returning the money. The unexpected return. On January 5, 2019, just a couple of weeks into his treatment, Grant made an abrupt return home, having completed less than a quarter of the necessary rehabilitation program. He had fled the clinic, where he was noted for his complete lack of compliance. Grant tearfully vowed to turn his life around and find employment, but threatened to end his life if forced to return to the rehab center. His parents agreed, but laid down strict rules. Grant was barred from using the computer, had to follow a strict schedule, and all his earnings were closely monitored. Additionally, he was given a part-time job at a local grocery warehouse. For about 3 weeks, Grant seemed to comply, leading his parents to believe he had matured and left his addictions behind. However, everything changed on Thursday, January 24, 2019, when Grant persuaded his mother to let him use the laptop briefly to check his email and post his resume online, hoping to find a more ambitious job than his current warehouse position. Margaret trusted her son and allowed him to use the laptop, making a fatal mistake. Naturally, Grant first tried to contact Sylvie, only to discover that his parents had already written to her, exposing the truth about him. He saw this as a betrayal. Moreover, his parents had humiliated him in front of the only woman he loved, and they had to pay for that. The brutal takedown of family. Remember the previously mentioned home gun collection? Chad had kept it in a special large safe, the key to which he trusted no one. However, Grant knew about another gun stored in his parents' bedroom, always kept loaded by his father, and it was this gun he decided to use. His mother was sitting at the computer in the home office when her youngest son quietly approached her from behind and shot her in the back of the head. The position of her body suggested she didn't even have time to turn around or understand what was happening. Next was his father,
who was about to return home from work. As soon as Chad entered the kitchen, he was confronted face to face with Grant and immediately received 2 bullets to the chest. Grant tensely contemplated his next move, devising an even more monstrous plan. He decided to frame his own brother Cody, the only person who had always stood up for him, helped him, and been his best friend. By then, Cody had moved out of the family home and was living separately with his girlfriend. To lure Cody home, Grant used his now-deceased father's phone to send several messages asking him to come home immediately because something terrible had happened. He didn't elaborate, confident that this information would be enough to make his brother rush home from work. Grant's calculation was correct, and Cody indeed arrived, even leaving work early. Entering the house, he only made it to the bottom of the staircase leading to the second floor before being shot and collapsing. Cody didn't die instantly. He had time to realize the horror of the situation, but was powerless to change it. After eliminating his family, Grant coldly wiped his fingerprints off the pistol, placed the weapon in his brother's hand to leave his prints, and then left it next to the body, making it look as if Cody had shot their parents and then himself. The rest of the evening, the killer calmly packed his things, downloaded video files of his communications with Sylvie from the computer, and even texted the girl. Having finished his affairs, he loaded his essentials into the car and drove away. Arrest and trial. It took the police just over a day to track down and arrest Grant, who was hiding in a small roadside motel in Orange County. He wasn't surprised, more disappointed that he was found so quickly, but he vehemently denied any guilt. During his interrogation at the station, he spun unbelievable tales about his father's incredible cruelty, alleging mistreatment towards him, his mother, and brother. Grant also spoke of his father's attempts to separate him from his beloved girlfriend Sylvie, whom he claimed to share true and pure love with. Regarding the events at their family home on the evening of January 24, 2019, his account was confusing and inconsistent. He suggested that his father and brother had a fight, Cody grabbed a gun, and ended Chad's life, with Margaret being an accidental victim. Grant claimed he could only guess the chronology of these horrific events, as he wasn't a witness himself, stating he spent the night in his car with his belongings after his father kicked him out. In the morning, he said he simply drove away, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded at home. His story sounded disjointed and implausible, and the evidence indirectly pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. As a result, Grant was arrested as the primary suspect in the triple homicide of his family members. He was held on a $750,000 bond, which he was unable to post, and thus remained in custody awaiting trial. The trial commenced on July 15, 2019. Notably, almost all witnesses who testified in court spoke against Grant, including his older brother Jason, relatives, and Cody's friend Jeremy, whom Grant had stolen money from during their trip to Japan. Those who knew the defendant personally described him as prone to various addictions, a pathological thief, and a liar. The main piece of evidence against Grant was a significant bank transfer from Chad's account to his younger sons. This transaction occurred late at night when all family members were already deceased. To confirm the transaction, the defendant had used his deceased father's finger for identification. The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, while his defense argued that Grant was ill and needed treatment. The final verdict was delivered on August 12, 2019. The court found 30-year-old Grant Amato guilty of first-degree triple homicide and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The case of Michelle O'Keefe. Who killed the aspiring actress? The judicial system, unfortunately, is not perfect, even in the most developed and democratic countries. Innocent people sometimes end up serving time for crimes they did not commit, a result of investigative errors or other mishaps. Such injustices usually come to light only when the real culprit is found and proven guilty. But what happens when someone convicted of murder is exonerated years later while the real perpetrator remains unpunished because crucial evidence was lost by the police at the time? The case of young American Michelle O'Keefe, killed under mysterious circumstances in the early 2000s, shook the nation. The investigation lasted several years until the main, and essentially the only suspect,
was imprisoned for a significant term. It seemed the case was closed, but after 11 years in prison, the convicted person's innocence was proven. Simultaneously, new details emerged, and another suspect appeared, likely the real murderer. However, more than 2 decades since the student's murder, her parents have become disillusioned with justice, losing hope that the person who took their daughter's life will face fair punishment. Let's delve into this story from the beginning and try to understand where the investigation went wrong and whether these errors could have been avoided. Who was Michelle O'Keefe? Michelle Teresa O'Keefe was born on October 11, 1981, in the quiet town of Hanford, California. The eldest of 2 children born to Patricia and Michael O'Keefe, Michelle grew up alongside her younger brother Jason. The O'Keefes were a well-off family, owning a profitable local store. Her parents were committed to ensuring their children received a quality education and could fully realize their talents and potential. Michelle was an exemplary student, excelled in sports and ballroom dancing, and was known for her attractive and artistic demeanor. She dreamed of becoming a famous actress, appearing in films, and conquering Hollywood. She possessed the talent, ambition, and attributes necessary for such a feat. After graduating high school with honors, Michelle easily gained admission to one of California's prestigious colleges. She continued her passion for dancing and took evening acting classes. Michelle actively participated in various events, appeared in commercials, and was often seen as an extra in movie and music video shoots. On her 18th birthday, her loving parents gifted her a luxurious blue Ford Mustang with a new Edge design concept. Michelle had always dreamt of owning this car and was overjoyed to receive it as a present. Unfortunately, it was this striking vehicle that likely drew the attention of her killer, leading to the tragic demise of the young Michelle. The Last Shoot. On February 22, 2000, 18-year-old Michelle O'Keefe and her close friend Jennifer Peterson, also an aspiring actress, headed to Palmdale, a scenic town in Los Angeles County, for a video shoot. They were to appear in the latest music video by the popular rock musician Robert James Ritchie, better known by his stage name, Kid Rock. Jennifer and Michelle were extras, dancing and revealing outfits for the video. The shoot consumed nearly the entire day, so by the time they returned to their cars parked at the nearby amusement park, it had almost darkened. Jennifer planned to go home, but Michelle had acting classes that evening. The friends chatted in the parking lot for a few minutes before parting ways. Jennifer walked to her car, while Michelle decided to stay behind to change into her regular clothes. She felt it inappropriate to attend her acting classes in the same outfit she wore for the video shoot, as it was quite provocative. With nowhere private to change on the parking lot, and finding it awkward to do so in her car, Michelle opted to quickly change her clothes right there on the street, next to her car, believing she was alone. This decision, unfortunately, likely proved to be a fatal mistake. Jennifer recalled lingering in the parking lot a while longer, chatting with her boyfriend on the phone. As she started to leave, she noticed the headlights of Michelle's Ford Mustang turning on. Believing Michelle was about to follow her, Jennifer felt reassured that her friend was safe. With loud music playing in her car, the last thing Jennifer saw before turning the corner was what she thought was Michelle's Mustang starting to back out. The murder of an aspiring actress. That evening, a young security guard named Raymond Lee Jennings was on duty at the park and its attractions. Around 9 o'clock, the 25-year-old heard sounds resembling gunshots emanating from the direction of the parking lot, followed by a car alarm. Lacking a firearm and equipped only with a taser, he hesitated to approach alone, knowing he stood little chance against armed assailants. Jennings promptly called his supervisor, Iris Malone, and reported the incident, also alerting the police. Malone arrived within minutes, so before law enforcement reached the scene, she and Jennings decided to cautiously inspect the situation at the parking lot. They immediately noticed a blue car, backed out into the middle lane and halted there with its headlights on and engine running. This was Michelle's Ford Mustang. The car owner was in the driver's seat, motionless and showing no signs of life. Upon closer inspection, Malone and Jennings observed blood inside the car and on Michelle's body, along with several bullet wounds. The driver's door was wide open, and the crime scene appeared horrific. It seemed that Michelle had been chased and initially wounded in the parking lot. She had tried to escape, leapt into her car, and even managed to start it. But the assailant caught up to her and fired several more shots, depriving the student of any chance of survival. Michelle's appearance was quite provocative. She had bright makeup and a tousled hairstyle, styled specifically for the video shoot. She was also wearing regular jeans and a shiny top. Apparently, Michelle had partially changed in the parking lot, as a shiny mini skirt matching the top, and a regular t-shirt were found next to her on the passenger seat. One of her shoes was on her foot, while the other lay away on the parking lot, presumably dropped as she dashed to her car. Crime scene investigation. Following the security guard and his supervisor, the first to arrive at the crime scene was the local sheriff's deputy. He noted that the young woman showed no signs of life, but he informed emergency services in case he was mistaken and she still had a chance of being saved. He also recorded the statements of Jennings and Malone. The arriving police officers began a thorough examination of the crime scene, gathering all possible evidence. They found several shell casings on the parking lot and noticed a bullet mark on the asphalt, slightly away from the car. This led to the conclusion that the perpetrator likely first fired a shot into the ground to intimidate the victim, then shot at her directly, as evidenced by bloodstains on the parking lot. The victim had run towards her car but didn't manage to escape, as the assailant caught up to her and fired several more shots. She died almost instantly from extensive injuries and significant blood loss. In total, 5 shell casings were found on the ground. Experts concluded that all shots were fired from the same weapon, but the bullets significantly differed from each other, raising questions that needed prompt answers. Also found on the ground was an earring, presumably dropped by the victim. Later, her friend identified this item, confirming it belonged to Michelle. However, the second earring was not found on or near the victim. This detail, unfortunately, was initially deemed insignificant and was forgotten for a long time, which turned out to be a crucial oversight. Theories and speculations initially, close relatives and friends of the murdered young woman were interviewed. They unanimously asserted that Michelle had no enemies or ill-wishers. Known for her sociable, open, and very friendly nature, everyone who knew her spoke highly of the student. Thus, a personal motive for the murder was almost immediately ruled out. The next theory considered was an unsuccessful robbery or carjacking attempt of her new vehicle. However, this seemed doubtful. The only personal item missing was her mobile phone, which she had used just minutes before the attack to tell her mother that the filming was over and she was heading back. Michelle's purse, containing her wallet and a couple of $100 in cash, was found at the passenger's feet. Police speculated that in the confusion and darkness, the assailant might have failed to notice the purse, and fearing the gunshot sounds had attracted security, didn't search the car. This could also explain why the carjacking attempt was aborted. It seemed the attacker initially did not intend to shoot, but only to threaten her with the weapon, but something went wrong. Another theory proposed that Michelle might have been mistaken for a lady of the night due to her appearance. She was dressed provocatively, with heavy makeup and high heels. It was possible the criminal noticed her on her way to the parking lot and followed her. In the darkness, he might have approached her with ill intentions, but upon being firmly rejected, he took her life in retaliation. Supporting this theory was the fact that her top was partially pulled down, exposing her left breast. This suggested that the attacker was likely a man. However, it was also possible that her thin, strapped clothing slipped during the scuffle, chase, or as the frightened, wounded young woman attempted to get into her car. The sole suspect. The first person interrogated was Raymond, the security guard on duty at the parking lot, who was believed to be the sole witness of the incident. He confirmed hearing gunshots and a car alarm around 9 in the evening, immediately reporting it to his supervisor and calling the police. Raymond noted he saw no one on the parking lot before or after the shots. No one fled or left the scene in the minutes following. Given that the time was still early and the area was popular, it's plausible that others nearby might have seen or heard something. Police became interested in Raymond's background and discovered that, despite his relatively young age, he was the head of a large family, raising 5 children. He served in the California National Guard and aspired to be a law enforcer, working while also studying at the police academy, gaining certain knowledge and skills. As the main witness to the murder, Raymond sought to help the investigation, naively thinking that this experience would be beneficial for his academy exams. When investigators asked him to present his version of events during an interrogation, Raymond detailed his perspective on how things might have unfolded. Being a top student, he meticulously considered all details, trying to piece together a coherent picture. He hypothesized where the attacker and victim might have been during the initial gunshot and how subsequent events unfolded. He based his story on the evidence, the location of shell casings, blood droplets, the victim's belongings, and the car. He also estimated the shooting distances. At that time, Raymond didn't realize that he was unwittingly digging his own grave. He just wanted to assist the investigation and be useful. However, the detectives investigating the case drew their own conclusions, suggesting that such detailed knowledge could only be possessed by the murderer himself. Since there were no other suspects, the security guard was charged with the girl's murder. New witnesses. Several weeks after Michelle's murder, a 17-year-old African-American girl named Victoria Richardson came to the police's attention. She had been in the parking lot on that tragic evening with her 18-year-old boyfriend and a couple of friends. They had been horseback riding in the park and returned to the parking lot after dark on February 22nd. According to Victoria, they were in their car, music blaring, preparing to leave when they heard unusual sounds. Initially, they mistook them for firecrackers or fireworks, paying little attention, but then realized they were gunshots. Victoria recalled seeing, just a minute and a half earlier, a man in a security guard's uniform walking towards a parked blue Ford Mustang nearby. After the strange sounds and the activation of a car alarm, the friends got out of their car and saw the Mustang, which had rolled backwards and stopped, no longer moving. Reportedly, they saw the security guard again, who warned them of an armed person on the parking lot and advised caution. Hearing this, the group hurried back into their car and cautiously left the parking lot, trying not to draw attention. When asked to describe the guard they interacted with, Victoria mentioned he was a middle-aged, heavy-set African-American man. This description matched another employee who had worked in the parking lot the day before Raymond's shift. This second guard was immediately detained and questioned. He had a solid alibi as he was at a family gathering at the time of the murder, confirmed by about 20 people. Therefore, despite inconsistencies in the witnesses' accounts, Jennings remained the sole suspect. Prolonged investigation and arrest. After 5 years, the investigation insisted that Raymond was the killer, partly because his knowledge and skills in forensics could convincingly deflect suspicion away from himself. However, evidence and witness testimonies didn't align coherently. The crime itself appeared irrational and odd, with no apparent motive for the suspect. Raymond had his own legally acquired pistol, which wasn't with him on the night of the murder. He presented this weapon to the police, and forensic analysis confirmed that the bullets weren't fired from it. Investigators speculated that he might have hidden unregistered firearms, but this theory was unsubstantiated. Meanwhile, the murdered girl's parents conducted their own investigation, hiring private detectives. Patricia and Michael felt the law enforcement was inadequately handling the case or simply inactive. They actively engaged in interviews and TV appearances, sharing their story to pressure the authorities. They were convinced that Raymond was responsible for Michelle's death and should be punished. Although there were no strong reasons to detain him initially, Raymond went to Iraq for military service, where he stayed for almost 5 years. Upon returning to the United States, he was immediately arrested and jailed. Raymond consented to a polygraph test but failed, which worked against him. Unable to post the $1 million bail set, he had to remain in custody for about a year while investigators and his defense prepared for trial. Trial and verdict. According to the prosecution, the security guard, Raymond, mistook Michelle in her revealing outfit for a sex worker and followed her to her car. After she rebuffed his advances, a scorned Raymond opened fire and then radioed his boss about the incident, stating he wouldn't approach the crime scene. The defense highlighted that the murder weapon was never found, either on the day or later. There were no DNA traces, fingerprints, or any signs of Raymond's presence at the crime scene. Interestingly, epithelial particles under the victim's nails did not match Raymond's DNA. Instead of probing whose DNA it was, the investigators convinced the court it was incidental contamination unrelated to the case. Raymond's personal belongings, car, locker, and home were thoroughly searched for the murder weapon, but a gunpowder residue test on his clothing was strangely not conducted at the time. Notably, Raymond resigned a few days after the incident due to threats from unknown individuals and returned his work uniform, which police received only a week later. It was claimed that he had thoroughly washed the uniform before returning it, thus erasing any gunpowder traces. However, traces of sweat and dust on the uniform indicated it hadn't been washed. Victoria Richardson, the aforementioned witness, testified in court, stating she saw a guard at the parking lot during the shooting. But she didn't specify who she saw, citing darkness and possible confusion. The prosecution seized upon her testimony as evidence of Raymond's guilt. The jury deliberated for a week but couldn't reach a unanimous decision. As a result, a new trial was scheduled to give both sides time to prepare. In February 2009, 11 out of 12 jurors found Raymond guilty of murder. In December 2009, the Supreme Court convicted Raymond Jennings of murder under aggravating circumstances, sentencing him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Raymond maintained his innocence, asserting in his final statement that he had no remorse since he didn't commit the crime. However, Michelle's parents and brother were convinced of his guilt and satisfied with the verdict. New trial and acquittal. Raymond Jennings spent nearly 11 years incarcerated, losing hope in justice as his appeals were repeatedly denied. However, in late 2015, renowned attorney Jeffrey Ehrlich and his son Clinton, a law student at the time, took interest in his case. They revisited the case files and found numerous errors, inconsistencies, and blatant violations in the evidence and trial proceedings. The Ehrlichs believed Raymond was wrongfully convicted and set out to prove his innocence. They compiled all evidence and appealed to the department responsible for reviewing convictions. Specifically, they pointed out that Raymond's uniform showed no gunpowder residue or blood splatter, only sweat and dust, indicating it wasn't washed. Additionally, they noted that Raymond was unarmed, and detectives failed to consider other individuals present at the park that evening. New reports suggested the murder was a spontaneous act, likely a botched robbery attempt. Moreover, Victoria Richardson, the main witness, and her boyfriend, both with a criminal history, were serving time for armed robbery at the time of the final trial, but were never considered suspects. The mix of different cartridges fired from the same gun, unusual for someone with military training, hinted at a street gang style. Richardson and her boyfriend were part of such a gang, but since they weren't initially investigated for Michelle's murder, many leads were irretrievably lost. Notably, the boyfriend wore an earring resembling the one found at the crime scene on the night of the murder. Despite failing to prove the criminal couple's involvement in the aspiring actress's murder, the Ehrlichs successfully established Jennings's innocence. Consequently, the former guard was factually acquitted, a significant distinction from legal or presumptive innocence. Sergeant Raymond Jennings was released from prison after nearly 11 years for a crime he didn't commit. The judge noted that jurors weren't informed about the presence of gang members at the crime scene that evening. In March 2017, Jennings received a $500,000 compensation for the wrongful conviction. A devout man, he later stated that God had heard his prayers and justice had prevailed. Only Michelle O'Keefe's parents remained deeply upset, believing the man they thought killed their daughter was wrongly freed. Having also lost their son in a car accident, the O'Keefes divorced, clinging to the belief that their daughter's supposed killer had been punished. Despite the case remaining unsolved, the likelihood of anyone being held accountable for Michelle's murder is now extremely low.